guys, it's me, Brandy, and welcome back to Astro-Tarot Research. I have been gone so long. It feels like it's been forever and a day, but you guys know I've been gone so long so that I can give you this long, super informative research video. I have all these pages of research. I had to type everything up. So you know it's going to be a lot. So I do want to warn you beforehand, if you see me sort of looking down, or if it looks like I'm sort of just reading stuff, it's because there is no way on this earth I could possibly just remember all of this information and to cover everything. So this video I conducted a sort of research study on Uranus in Taurus, and I used the Uranus and Taurus transit to sort of show you the influences of Uranus and Taurus on today's current events. As you know, there's a lot happening and going on in the world, and there's some things that are just completely and totally chaotic. Now, this is not to say Uranus and Taurus is the only astrologically significant influence that's going on that's causing all of these events. In fact, I know I mentioned on my weekly tarot readings on my Instagram, that is at Astro_Tarot Research. On my Instagram, I do a weekly tarot reading, and on those weekly tarot readings, it was on the week for the April 5th through the 11th, where I mentioned the Saturn and Aquarius effect, and I'm going to insert a clip here. So as I was saying before, last time Saturn went into Aquarius, several things happened. We had the Rodney King beatings, and we had, as a result or direct link to the Rodney King beatings, we had O.J. Simpson get off for the murder of his wife. Now, according to the law, he's not guilty, but I think socially we understand that more than likely he did it. The Rodney King beatings, you had a bunch of people seeing all the injustices going on versus the cops and the black community, or even just poor minority communities, especially in LA. But this was just actually across the country, how a lot of people in power were abusing and misusing things, and attacking citizens, or using extreme brute and disgusting amount of force against civilians. And they got off on that, on all those charges and beating those people, which in turn led to the LA riots. And when we had the LA riots, we had a lot of people, especially people in poorer communities, a lot of people in Koreatown in particular being affected a large amount by the LA riots. People who don't have a lot of money, who are having their own businesses, and their businesses are being looted and destroyed. Their whole life savings and families and communities are just being split and torn apart. What Saturn's going to do is it's going to bring up a lot of social injustices, a lot of problems and systemic problems. It's even doing it now. So you can see Saturn in Aquarius's effect, as well as we have the sort of Jupiter and Pluto effect. And Jupiter and Pluto conjunction has a lot of financial crises and things going on, a lot of upheavals in that area, as well as upheavals with education, children. Jupiter rules things like publicizing things. Jupiter rules things that have to do with travel and expanding your mind culturally. So you may even feel this huge shift. I guess everyone's feeling this huge shift culturally across the globe, where it can be just things that are changing and transforming, where we're becoming almost like either one culture, or where the lines between where one thing starts and one thing ends is a little bit different way of living. That's pretty much what Jupiter ultimately wants to give. Jupiter is a planet of knowledge. And so when Jupiter and Pluto come together, Pluto has to do with sort of upheavals. It has to do with even traumatic situations. It's really not a negative energy. It's just sort of when Pluto comes in, oftentimes, at least in this world, what makes people change and what pushes people and propels them forward is a lot of chaotic situations, because people become complacent and they become familiar. It's usually when people go through some huge trauma, what do they call it? almost rock bottom. There you go. That's why we have the phrase rock bottom, right? It's almost like when people hit this sort of rock bottom, that's when they realize they have to change. But when everything's going right and everything's fluffy and everything's nice and sweet, people don't feel a need to change, right? They don't feel that strong enough need to grow. Basically, what Jupiter is going to do, because it's so expansive, it's going to emphasize on a very deep and massive level this actual need for change, massive and unbelievable change. And the way to do that is sort of to bring about a lot of crisis situations. And unfortunately, the results is very sad for a lot of people. So the combination of all these energies is sort of bringing about what's going on in today's affair, along with certain other transits, conjunctions, and etc. I'm just specifically talking about Uranus and Taurus in this video, but I can sort of make other videos to sort of explain what those transits and conjunctions, as well as other astrological sort of meanings they bring about, and how those astrological placements sort of influence the world around us. So for those of you who already follow me on my Instagram, you guys already got that heads up on what was going to be happening with all the social unrest and social justice things going on. And for now, I want to give a little bit more clarity and insight on what is to come involving Uranus and Taurus. This video will be divided into several sections, and you are more than welcome to sort of like click on whatever area interests you. I just wanted to give a long informative video for those who are interested and wanted to kind of just sit through and watch everything. I'm sorry if I don't like put in a lot of different pictures and videos. I feel like if I did that, things will take another month. And so I just hope you guys don't mind just like mainly looking at my face. I'll probably try to insert some pictures or something like that, so it's not super, super boring. Let's get into this. First, I want to get started what got me sort of invested in looking at the Uranus and Taurus transit. Now, I remember I mentioned before, if you see me looking down, it's not because I have like some sort of like, I'm a robot and I need to be programmed in some script. It's just a lot that I want to mention because I don't want to forget this. I was kind of like sitting in my kitchen, like listening to the news, and it was on NPR, but I can't remember the name of the program. But on the program, we had two people talking about the pandemic and how it sort of like made them personally evaluate their daily choices, especially when it came to food. Now, they spoke of how they really never really considered the needs of the people working in food-related industries. They spoke about how there were low wages and benefits for those who sort of worked along the supply chain, and how it correlates to what we value as a country. For the host on the show, they kind of felt like it was a lack of disregard for the well-being of those who work in the food industry that we have in this country, that would indicate that we don't place a huge amount of worth on the individuals. We don't place a lot of worth on the value of sort of like human life, comfort, benefits. Those individuals they're talking about would be like farmers, migrant workers, hostess, waitresses, you know, cashiers, factory workers. It's like the people on the program, for them, they kind of felt like it made them reevaluate their choices and how much value they put into the lives of their others who work on like getting food on their table. For example, these people are being deemed essential workers, but it's like they're still not even being able to meet the bare minimum when it comes to health coverage. So it's kind of a strange position to be in, where you're sort of deemed an essential worker, but you can't even afford health insurance during a pandemic. In the discussion, they were trying to sort of discuss different solutions, like for example, maybe like raising the prices of apples and oranges in order to give the grocery store workers a higher paying wage. They also mentioned, and this is not an exact quote, that our food system is strong but not resilient. It is not built to be flexible and creative. which means we're set up to have a lot of big factories and companies. They're going to experience a lot of turbulence when there is a lack of demand. Our system is like set up to favor sort of like large factories, and they're also set up in a way that they can't sort of slow down or produce less food along the sort of supply chain. So all these resources are going to waste. Okay, so we're just set up to be sort of like nonstop production. And now that we have like the virus and the pandemic and all of this going on and people out of work, it's just creating a lot of problems. I should mention that I'm talking about the US food system in general, though I do know that there are some issues with food system across the globe. I was just watching a video on, I can't remember where in Africa, but it was in a country in Africa, and this man who was a farmer, his crops were being eaten up by lotuses. And I know this is happening in India as well, where there's this huge lotus problem. And in Africa, the situation was this man was not being like delivered pesticides because people weren't coming towards him due to the virus. There was nobody to sell anything to. There was nobody to get supplies from their food chain. And that particular country in Africa was also inflexible. So I don't know if this is globally, but it does seem to be happening in more than one country, especially the US. Due to the pandemic, it has sort of uncovered all of these problems we have within our own food supply system, and it has shown us that there is a strong need for smaller suppliers as well as farmers in order for us to keep going and keep functioning in a healthy and resourceful manner. This pandemic has shown us that there is a real need for like a farm to table approach. Now, this is all according to an article I read on the website The Conversation. This person suggests a solution is selling directly to customers and restaurants. Their quote was, "Unsold items can return to farmers as feed and fertilizer." So what this does is it creates a lack of waste. Instead of having these companies run nonstop producing lots and lots of dairy, fruits, meats, etc., whatever's going on, we can have farmers on a much smaller scale go directly to the consumers, to the restaurants, sell their products, and there's no need for an overproduction or a waste of our resources and materials. So when I heard all this information and I read it all, like, it just got me so excited, because I was like, yes, this is such Uranus in Taurus energy. It is us reevaluating our systems and our structures that no longer work for us or that are no longer effective, especially in the areas that come to food, resources, security, finances, when things that have to do with community structures like states versus government. It has to do with a lot of education, fertility, and our healthcare system. But let us kind of like jump into this, because I'm just so ready to just like let you know. Before we get started, I do want to mention that I use a combination of Western and Vedic astrology. So I use Western astrology in terms of the normal sort of sign placements, but then I always use Vedic Nakshatras, because I just find Vedic Nakshatras to be so eye-opening and extremely accurate, and one of the most detailed and focused part of astrology. And I wanted to give like this short shout out to sort of like Claire Nocti, because I think I started watching her videos probably like over 2 years ago, but I haven't really had time to sort of do research myself. So I kind of feel like she inspired me and pushed me forward to delve deeper into nakshatras. So I just wanted to give a thanks to her. That all being said, like, all of this research is mine, but I definitely wouldn't have been as inspired to go further without her. So I definitely highly recommend her channel. She's amazing. Uranus first entered Taurus back in May 2018, and then it retrograded into the sign of Aries and back into Taurus on March 6, 2019, where it will stay until April 26, 2026. So this transit started a little bit while back, but it's not going to end for a while. So, you know, that's why we're doing this video here. Okay, so the last time Uranus was in Taurus was around the time of the Great Depression up into the beginning of World War II. So this was around June 1934 to May 1942. Okay, that was the last time Uranus was in Taurus. Now that you have like the sort of the timeline, I want to jump into the tarot associations first, and then I want to break down the astrological associations. And what I mean by that is every astrology planet sort of sign is associated with a tarot card. And in this case, you have Uranus associated with the Fool card, and you have Taurus associated with the Hierophant card or the Pope in certain decks. So let us jump into that. When we have Uranus and Taurus, it's almost as if we have the Fool and the Hierophant side by side. So it's like the Fool meets the Hierophant. The Fool card represents innovation, newness, innocence, exploration, purity of thought, a clean slate, children, childlike behavior, rebellion, new beginnings, blind optimism, and, you know, shocking things, radical things, rebelliousness, invention, unexpected happenings going on, and this journey into the unknown. It also represents a man or a woman, whatever, with very few possessions and a very broad and open outlook. Now, when we get to what the Hierophant represents, the Hierophant represents spirituality. It represents spiritual teachings. It represents the interpreter of the divine to the physical plane. It represents what we teach others and what we sort of teach ourselves. Okay, so the Hierophant goes into your own personal beliefs and the beliefs of the community. What I mean by that, you know the saying where you have, is blood thicker than water? Okay, so the saying implies that your family is more important than, you know, everyone else you may encounter. When we have the Hierophant appearing as it is correlating to this phrase, it's kind of like asking you, oh, do you really believe that? Do you really see things that way? Do you really place family above all, or do you put your friends as being more important? It's asked us to sort of like evaluate our own personal beliefs and values in that sense. Another example, which might be more clear with the Hierophant having to do with your own personal beliefs and values, it's kind of like, let's say Instagram. Let's say you post a picture and you get 50 likes, and then someone else posts a picture and they get 5 million likes. Okay, do you value that perception of judgment? Do you base your own self-worth on how many likes you get on a picture? Do you place an importance on popularity, on showmanship, on an app that celebrates, you know, maybe physical body creativity? It celebrates a lot of things actually, but it's mainly known for its celebration of, I guess, female beauty, or decelebration to some people. It's just a matter of your perspective. What is my baseline for my beliefs? Okay, the Hierophant represents social norms. It represents like knowing the unspoken rule book, like social contracts, or it's just this unspoken rule people have that of behaviors that you do. For example, like I remember when I was studying abroad, a lot of people would sort of ask me, why do Americans, you know, always ask, how are you? And they don't really mean it. They don't really want to know how you are. They just kind of expect you to say, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay, whatever. And when you give them like a real answer that's like, I'm not doing so well, and you go into a whole conversation about your family and your life, they're kind of like, you know what I mean? They kind of pull back because they're not expecting someone to answer in that way. How are you kind of came, at least in America, it's kind of sort of the same as basically saying hi. Okay, it's like saying hi, you know, it's just a recognition that you are there and you are existing as a person. It's not really a incentive to start a conversation, and that's more of like a social rule. So that's what the Hierophant represent, unspoken social rules and social norms. The Hierophant also represents your experiences versus being like a teacher and a student. It also represents rituals, cultural traditions, and large structural institutions like churches, businesses, the government as well, because it's kind of like big brothers watching sort of energy. The Hierophant sort of also represents like if you were part of like a Boys and Girls Club, like a community club that you may have, or like a, what am I thinking of? A community center. That would be like the Hierophant. The Hierophant can also sort of represent people who are of your same background or of your same sort of belief system, which is why I say it represents cultures as well. So before we get into like combining these energies, I do want to mention a few things. And the reason why I am mentioning these things is because tarot has a good amount of religious symbolism. And I think it has to do with the time period in which these cards sort of came about. From what I was reading and from my understanding, at the time that these cards came about, religion just played such an intricate role and a part of people's day-to-day structures and cultural norms, hence why we have the Hierophant card, and often cards I've seen it indexed to represent the Pope. Back in the period where the times were where these cards were made, the tarot cards would start becoming like really popular and sort of descended into the public. It would have been the norm that your sort of religious belief was just integrated in your social life. I'm not going to say every aspect, but it was integrated enough fully that it was just like the norm that you would just maybe like pray before you eat or go to church, or everyone had their own sort of religion and their lives may have centered around it. Especially during this time period, especially in the Catholic Church, the papacy would have been the person who just decides the rules and how we're going to run things. Hence we had this whole debacle with King James sort of denouncing, I think it was King James who denounced the Catholic Church. I'm trying to remember, I should know this, I went to Catholic school, but like but we had that separation when it came to English royal throne separating itself from the church in order to gain more power. It's saying, no, we're not going to listen to this spiritual figurehead anymore. We're going to put the king above everyone else. They had to literally separate themselves from the church in order to have a stronger influence. That's how much of an influence that these religious factors had in people's day to day. And I'm not saying everyone was Catholic or anything, but like, let's face it, most people were significantly more religious. So that's why I'm mentioning these sort of symbolisms in order to better understand the tarot connection. So don't think I'm just kind of like trying to throw a belief system onto you. Also, forgive my ignorance if I get anything wrong. Feel free to correct me or give me more information in the comments if you have studied this fully. I'm obviously not a historian, nor am I a religious scholar, so I'm not going to get everything completely right. Taurus is connected to the sign of the bull, the sign of the ox, okay? And in the Bible, the tribe of Ephraim often related two oxen yoked together to symbolize a teacher and student relationship. And in Judaism, oxen often symbolized a older person teaching a younger person how to plow the field. And this was related to preparing the youth for the world. So another correlation to teacher and student relationship. Okay. And so what we can sort of gauge from this symbolism is quite a good amount of information. You can see why, given the religious text and correlation, why the sign of Taurus ended up being connected to the Hierophant, as oxen were sort of representative of this, I'm a teacher, I'm here to sow some seeds, I'm here to plow the field, I'm here to bring things into fruition. And we can even bring about that symbolism to give us an idea of what sort of issues may come to pass. So we know that the sign of Taurus, even way back when people were writing their religious tests, has that association with ox and oxen having to do with teacher and student relationships, or just education in general, or preparing people, the youth, for the world, or preparing just maybe not even just the youth, just people in general, because you can be a student and a teacher at any age, right? But preparing people for the world. We know education is going to be a forefront of the issues, okay? So that's what we can sort of gather from symbolism like that. So I just want to kind of bring you guys through my process and the way of thinking and the way of connecting information. But let's move on. There's another biblical association in Deuteronomy, and the passage states, "You shall not muzzle an ox when it's treading out the grain." But let me read that again. "You shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out grain." This is so the ox can eat the grain. It is taken to mean everyone deserves to enjoy the fruits of their labor. In other words, don't sell your workers short. Don't cheat them out of their money. Don't cheat them out of their profit. When we're looking at a statement like that, and that another correlation using ox, connecting to the sign of Taurus, we know that we're going to deal with issues based upon labor, based upon wages, based upon allowing people to reap the benefits of the system that they're taking a part in, which was exactly what I was explaining earlier in the intro, with how those two people were radio hosts were talking about how the workers along the food supply don't even get to secure good health insurance benefits, even though they're the ones that are putting their lives on the line and putting their lives at risk. Lastly, another association I wish to mention, and sorry if I mispronounce this, is Chenghua's Annal Republic of China, which was 1911 through 1945. But basically, the Li ethnic people didn't go to doctors. Instead, they decided to use alternative medicine and took advice from witches who told them to eat beef as like medicine when they get sick and pray for good health. So Chinese culture has sort of like associated oxes and cows to be with fertility. And I believe India also associates cows with fertility, but I don't want to just throw that information out there and be wrong, okay? So we know we're going to be dealing with issues in regards to fertility, in regards to people's overall general well-being when it comes to health and, you know, procreation issues and etc. like that, right? It can help us better understand the world around us, as well as for those who are interested in the occult, not to sort of take things so literally, because that's something that I see a lot when it comes to the spiritual community. Now, this isn't a bad thing at all, but this is only my opinion, so don't think I'm like trying to make some judgment on people, because I don't want people to think that. I've noticed a lot of people will take information quite literally, which is why I'm giving a video, or giving, I'm like giving you some reward. This is why I'm doing a video like this, in order for people to stop thinking so literally and start thinking a little bit more abstract, because you'll have a little bit more freedom to make connections, and it's going to be a lot easier for you, okay? So when you take something like the sign of Taurus, like how I just did, and I said, okay, oxen, why was Taurus associated with oxen? What did oxen mean around the time these came out? Okay, there was a lot of religious symbolism going on. Let's look at the different cultures going on around the times this was made, so you can see what oxen represent, and so you can see what the sign of Taurus represents. And not only that, but now you're getting a stronger interpretation of the Hierophant card. Now you're understanding the Hierophant has to do not only with spiritual practices, it has to do with communities, it has to do with people coming together, it has to do with benefiting people on mass scales, because everyone needs to eat, right? Everyone needs to have essential needs in order to survive. Now you're starting to make more connections, which can help you as a reader or an astrologer. I hope that makes sense to you as to why I'm doing this and what this overall means. Now that we have covered sort of the history and the religious symbolism connecting, as well as the tarot general associations, we can sort of combine these energies together in order to get a fuller picture of what we are going to be experiencing while this transit is coming about, and flourishing and pushing its way into our lives, okay? When we have the Fool meets the Hierophant, the common theme between both of these cards coming together is faith. So you know how the Fool represents just blind optimism of just putting yourself out there and letting go and sort of letting God, letting yourself just experience the world as is. Like the Fool doesn't really have an expectation. He kind of just has this optimism to him that, hey, it's gonna work out, right? Just as the Hierophant has this sort of optimism that there's this higher power looking out for everyone. So you're going to have a lot of people sort of relying on their own sort of spiritual connections, their own sort of spiritual practices, or their own sort of communities or ways of belief systems in order to pull themselves through this time period. Like that's going to be a prevalent theme. Both just sort of believe that we're going down the right path and there's better to come. But when we do like the basic sort of word combination of these two, which I think will help you give like a clearer picture, and I'm going to give you a list because I have this whole list of combination of words so you guys can see it. So when we combine this information together, we have learning new rituals, we have establishing new values, we have creating new social norms, radical beliefs taking place, establishing new financial systems, new institutions, new programs, stepping away from tradition, different educational standards, new education, new structure, new corporate structures, new communities, revealing a divine message, unexpected rules and regulations, radical groups, shocking beliefs, new authorities, different status quos, breaking commitments, breaking tradition, new sort of inventions, okay? So you can count on Uranus and Taurus to reveal a lot of problems and systems, and because of that, it's going to bring about new inventions or new solutions would probably be the best meaning for that. We have innovative teaching, and you know, we can go on and on with the list of associations. I did want to give like a quick side note. So another way you can sort of look at this, if you're very familiar with Vedic astrology and the North Node, Rahu, or South Node, Ketu, if you're affirmed with those terms, you can sort of look at Uranus as being like Rahu or Ketu. Their energies are very, very, very similar. For example, when somebody has like Uranus in the 10th house, it can give a reputation similar to that of Ketu or Rahu, where somebody can be spiritual, eccentric, or controversial. Somebody, for example, like Jim Carrey, who a lot of audiences can find like very polarizing. And I know he has like a history of being like very frustrating or difficult to work with. And the 10th house represents like your career and reputation and, you know, what your work environment is like. You can look at this as being like how Rahu would work, where it makes somebody seem like very out of the box, very hard to predict, very like out there or radical. Okay, so you can look at Uranus as Rahu like energy because they are very, very similar. With Jim Carrey's chart, he comes off very polarizing. I know one time he tried to get like this wrestler to like break his neck or injure his neck, and the guy refused, so Jim Carrey provoked him, and essentially the guy, because he was provoked, ended up actually injuring Jim Carrey's neck. And he is also known for having like these crazy radical beliefs, especially when it comes to like vaccinations. He's extremely against it, which, you know, to audiences can be very polarizing, because if they have kids and they're vaccinating their kids and they have this actor saying, you know, vaccinations is poison, you know, they're probably not going to connect with Jim Carrey on that level or have the same belief system. So you can sort of see how Uranus and Taurus is going to bring about that sort of radical energy of saying, this is what I believe, and like it's just going to be to the highest extent, and it's going to seem so so unbalanced in a way, because Rahu energy can be unbalanced, especially Ketu energy too. They can come off very much like too extreme. So Uranus energy at some points can very much be extreme. So I just wanted to give that like as a side note. It's not really, you may not even get it if you're not really into Vedic astrology like that, but for those who have that deeper dive and that deeper interest and understand what those placements mean, then you're really going to understand that concept of what to expect with the planet Uranus. If we take the sign associations, we have Taurus representing money, we have Taurus representing family, we have Taurus representing what you value, Taurus representing food, Taurus represents music, Taurus represents teeth, and it also represents speech in a way. Even though really Gemini is kind of like words coming together, Taurus is more like sound. It doesn't have to really mean anything. Like these sounds only have meaning when they come into Gemini, but when they're in Taurus, they just mean sounds. Does that make sense to you, or am I just sounding crazy? Like if I just said blah blah, you know what I mean? That could just be Taurus. That's just a bunch of sounds coming out of my mouth. But when I get to Gemini, I have to define what those signs mean. So Gemini, this is why the sign of Gemini and Taurus are like right next to each other, because now we have sound, and okay, what does this sound mean? And that's Gemini's job to define what that means. Taurus represents speech, but it doesn't necessarily represent like these words have meaning, okay? Taurus represents security, it represents your throat, it represents your saving, and it represents your skin as well, okay? Though Saturn mainly represents your skin, okay? Just want to throw that out there. The planet Saturn, a sign of Capricorn, really kind of get into the nitty gritty of skin. Taurus is more like skin up, your face up, okay? Like that. Uranus represents astrology itself, or just any areas of the occult. It represents innovation, it represents reform, it represents anything new, anything off the beaten path. It represents liberation, riots, it represents disruption of the status quo, it represents independence, it represents like space, like out in outer space. It represents friends, it represents natural disasters. So, I mean, no natural disasters have hit yet, but honestly, I mean, the likelihood that there won't be a major natural disaster while Uranus is in Taurus, especially when it comes to sort of like crops and etc. happening while Uranus is in Taurus, is highly unlikely, just based on their representations. So if we combine these energies, and given what we know about the tarot associations as well, we can create this bigger picture, this more clear picture of what's going to happen. We're going to have a lot of controversial beliefs and radical beliefs. We're going to have a division of politics. We're going to have riots surrounding money, surrounding wages, surrounding general security. We're going to have new families, communities, and groups forming. We're going to have a lot of, more than likely, some natural disasters taking place affecting the food supply. We're going to hear a lot of voices, because like I said, Taurus represents your voice. We're going to hear a lot of voices from people who are off the beaten path, right? From people who don't fit inside the normal sort of box of this is exactly what things need to be. What I mean by that, usually Uranus will represent the LGBTQ community, or it will represent minority groups, because Uranus has that connection to Saturn as well, the sign of Aquarius. And Saturn itself represents minority groups. So just to let you know, so a lot of Saturn energy and Uranus energy can connect in a similar way. Same with Rahu. Rahu can represent people who are just foreign or different from you in general. Doesn't necessarily mean minority groups, but if the standard is white and you're black, then, you know, you would be represented by like Rahu in whatever country you're in, people who aren't in the majority. We can also take these words to have to do with freedom of speech, right? Because Uranus represents being free, being independent, being able to sort of stand on your own. And like I said, Taurus represents like your throat and sounds coming out of it. So when we have Uranus and Taurus, we're going to have a lot of things having to do with your speech. I know a lot of astrologers said that Saturn and Aquarius has to do with limiting speech, and they're right with that too. But with the combination of Uranus and Taurus as well, we're also going to see things having to do with your voice, you know, what comes out of it, and being able to protest or something like that, because Uranus represents protest, and with Taurus representing like your voice and the sounds that come out of it and the ability to say what you need to say, like just the ability to be able to even say it, we're going to see a lot of issues surrounding that. So that's why you see a lot of protests. The combination of that Saturn Aquarius energy and Uranus and Taurus and etc., a few other energies, is what's bringing about that. There also may even be some radical changes regarding the music industry, just because Taurus has that connection to music going on. So if you see a lot of different things happening in the music industry, don't be alarmed by that too. That's some Uranus and Taurus energy. Sorry if my camera goes out of focus. I need to get a new camera. This camera I've had for ages, and it's just, the focus problem is super annoying. Now that we've gone and covered every sort of like symbolic and astrological and tarot and even religious connections that we have to the sign of Uranus and Taurus, as well as the combination, word meanings, and etc., let us actually go into the history of what Uranus and Taurus has done. So last time Uranus went into Taurus, a great deal of churches were pushing for social reform in the United States. So President Herbert Hoover thought it wasn't the government's job to sort of help people out on like their day-to-day businesses or economically with private businesses. This meant that local organizations would do their best to sort of support communities, but it was not effective because communities were sort of like biting off more than they could chew. It was when Franklin D. Roosevelt became president after Hoover that Franklin Roosevelt and Congress started introducing the New Deal, a series of programs set place in order to help farmers, the unemployed, youth, and the elderly. He also ended prohibition, which was originally introduced into law and seen as an issue of public morals. The ending of prohibition was very polarizing in the northern and southern states, with northern states being for and southern being against, which actually is a very common theme, at least in America, when it comes to Uranus and Taurus. It does seem to create this sort of polarization of social issues, especially regarding morals. And this happened right before like the Civil War, where you had Uranus and Taurus right before the Civil War, where you had the South being pro-slavery and the North being obviously anti-slavery and being abolitionist. It is controversial whether the New Deal programs even sort of helped the economy, especially by historians who basically sort of indicate and say, most will agree on, that World War II is what really sort of like made those major improvements to the economy, giving that it provided jobs. So before then, the New Deal program, it did a little bit, but its main job and what it really did is sort of give more power to the government over states, institution, and providing security and benefits to its citizens, which was the job of more states and smaller communities before. The New Deal program comes in, we have this polarizing effect between the North and the South. Uranus and Taurus is creating more control and more power towards the government, but that's only because it was kind of needed at the time. States couldn't handle taking care of their own people. They were being overwhelmed. And it was through government programming and government funding that people were giving some sort of relief, but overall it did not cause the economy to fully recover. It was World War II which brought upon that change. There were also more standards being set in place during this time period, such as Social Security, such as establishing a 40-hour work week, such as establishing a minimum wage, as well as ending child labor. Actually, you'll kind of see all the themes that I pointed out earlier sort of appear over and over and again whenever Uranus goes into Taurus. We're going to deal with issues of morality. We're going to deal with issues regarding security. We're going to deal with issues regarding labor. We're going to deal with issues regarding civil liberties. We're going to deal with issues regarding like power and control, especially in America. It's going to be like states versus government, federal levels, who has the power, who has the control over that, over the people. So far, it's been leaning more, at least I think nowadays it's kind of bending back a little bit more to states power, and I can see why, because during the Great Depression, it's like they gave up so much power towards the government, so much control over them dealing with their private businesses and daily lives. And now it kind of points back to the issue which I pointed out in the intro, where we have these big, huge companies sort of providing all of the materials and resources to everyone in smaller communities, even rural communities, even communities who should probably be making their own businesses and profits. So it's almost like the last transit gave up too much control to the government, and so this transit in a way is like coming to fix that in a way and give less control and give more power back to sort of smaller businesses, smaller communities, smaller institutions, and stimulating the economy in a different manner. But it just reminded me, I can kind of see why Vedic astrologers don't really use Uranus, because Uranus in a way acts a little like, it acts like Saturn, it acts like Rahu, it acts like these like combination energies that you're just like, well, what do we need this energy for? But it does kind of, I think it gives a clear idea. It's just another way of interpreting things. I think you can definitely read a chart without looking at Uranus and Taurus, looking at the planets Uranus or Pluto or Neptune. But for me personally, I just find it like one of those easier things to go to. It's just like, oh, well, this transit is happening, I can just clearly look this out and see what's happening. We also had a few other events take place in history. I want to give an example, and I'll go a little bit further into it a little bit later, but we had the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin, and at this time Hitler was obviously in power, and he took this opportunity to sort of promote his fascist beliefs, and a lot of athletes as well as countries were protesting. I believe the US was actually thinking of boycotting the Olympics that summer, but I'm glad they didn't, because it provided Jesse Owens, a black athlete, an opportunity to shine and show his strength as an athlete, which is great, because I think that just boosted a lot of morale within the black community, which during the Depression there was not a lot of opportunities for. Okay, so I'll get into that in a second, but like, and the reason I'm specifically pointing this out is because through this time period, it's kind of giving you that example of that radical belief system, that Uranus and Taurus energy, where people are so adamantly pushing for their own beliefs and drilling it into other people. And because of this, it's creating a lot of social unrest and a lot of social injustices as well. So it's like the people in power are pushing their own beliefs on what they believe a society should be, and that society is pushing back. And that's what's happening even now, like I said before a little bit earlier in the video, where you kind of don't even have to look at Saturn and Aquarius, but it is another way to view things, where when we have Uranus and Taurus, we have somebody at some point pushing their own belief systems onto another crowd, or having some sort of social contract that is not benefiting everyone, and then people are going to push back against it with their own beliefs and their own systems, and everyone's going to have a really radical point of view, which is going to create conflict, which happens seemingly every Uranus and Taurus transit. It's not really a laughing matter, because the results are really horrific, but I just wanted to point out so you can sort of see these events, these themes coming up over and over again. During this Depression, we also had a lot of workers going on strike and unions being formed. We also had a gender expectations and gender rules being changed. So as I said before, those societal norms begin to change. Those gender roles begin to shift, okay? We have a lot of different opportunities, not even just gender roles, it's just kind of just people's roles in society as in general are beginning to shift, okay? So because the economy was so shaky and because we didn't have a lot of jobs available and a lot of people were unemployed, there was no possible way people were going to get by on just one income household. This was not the time period in which women just were equal in any way, shape, or form in terms of the job situation. But this was basically the beginning of that. This was the beginning of women entering the workforce. And then you guys know World War II happened, and then the workforce was pretty much dominated by women. And you had that poster with the woman with the arm on it like that, and she was promoting women to work and women to be in strength. And then World War II ends, and then you have women sort of being kicked out of those jobs that they earned, and their place in society kind of being smushed again and being redefined and again. So when Uranus first enters Taurus, now women are first getting their sort of like taste of the workforce. The last thing I sort of want to mention as a general thing was the government would also push for artistry and overall, not just I guess physical health, but sort of like a mental health. Like I felt like the government was pushing these artistic programs with the New Deal to sort of bring about a sense of like pride or a sense of just uplifting spirits in a sense, because who doesn't like looking at like pretty things and stuff, right? So the government recognizes that there is also a need for some sort of spiritual uplifting, which is not surprised with Uranus and Taurus, and I just told you that connection with the Hierophant card and everything. So there's this sort of spiritual morale being risen. But it's also through an institution, which was the government, which you wouldn't really expect, at least nowadays. I don't think the government funds too many art programs, or maybe I'm just unaware of them. But during the New Deal, they were definitely funding many artists. Now let's go more in depth to what was happening during the Great Depression and how that sort of mirrors what's happening now. And I want to start with the issue of education, just because that was such a prevalent theme throughout society and throughout tarot and its connection to Taurus and etc. That was just like the main one that kept coming up so much. What happened with education during the Great Depression? So let's start with how things were before the Great Depression. So before the Great Depression, there weren't that many people in school. School was kind of seen more as like a privilege. So before, children were kind of seen as like mini workers, really. They're just thrown into the workforce. I shouldn't say thrown, but like they're seen as helping sort of provide security and finances for the home. And education was seen for people who maybe had some free time, or for kids with families that didn't really need them to work. But it was like during the Great Depression that this outlook on education, as well as teachers and students, began to change. More people were in school during the Great Depression because of the lack of jobs. So children were now spending more time in school, which is like ironic. Before we would have like a classroom, and let's say the classroom would be like, it would be like grades kindergarten through, let's say, 8th grade, like just all in one room together. You would have a teacher sort of teaching everybody everything. So there was a lot less structure, a lot less organization going on. People began to sort of see the flaws in that sort of way of thinking. Obviously, you have people at different sort of mental levels. I mean, you realize, oh wait, I'm just one teacher. How am I going to kind of go around the classroom and teach these people different things? It just becomes a very ineffective system. Another thing that we begin to see in schools is, because we have more children there, we start to see that there is a lot of disparities, especially between white schools and black schools, where black schools were pretty much getting the short end of the stick. White schools would receive a lot more funding, or at least a lot more educational opportunities. The quality was just a lot higher in terms of education. Another thing that became an issue, or I don't even know if it's an issue or just something that just changed when I looked at this, and I was just like, oh, America's kind of like that today. Like, they say it's a melting pot, but really it's more like a box that they try to stuff everything into. That sounds so negative, but like, it's just like, it's like it's like people sort of refer to America as a melting pot, but I kind of feel like it's more like this is a box and we're trying to get people to fit into this. And so during the Depression, a lot of Cherokee Native American children were sent to missionary schools, and because they were sent to missionary schools, they were required to speak English. It was that requirement to speak English that sort of stripped them away from their traditional teaching. Like, it just kind of pulls them away from their culture and establishes a new normal, which is what I was talking about before with Uranus and Taurus defining new social norms. So you have this group of Cherokee children who are, before they spoke a language that was connected to their culture, now they're being put in a position where they need to bend to the norm, bend to the standard of what people want you to do, which is also relates to having the people in power kind of place their own beliefs and structures onto other people. You see that going out throughout the Great Depression. We have those traditions sort of dying, and we have new standards being set in place, okay? Another thing that was happening during the Great Depression is, because obviously we have a loss of jobs and stuff, we have teachers' salaries and schools' fundings being cut. Another thing we're seeing with the Depression is, before the Great Depression, school didn't really have like a set time limit. I think now it's like around 8-7 hours or something like that, but before there was just like no rules on how long school would be. So some days might be 5 hours, some days might be 3, some might be 4. And when we're coming out of the Great Depression, we have more standards being set in place, more regulation, more rules, more structure. We had the NAACP fighting against shortage of equal policies in northern schools in particular. And I don't know if this was because of their fight, or if this was just, I think it's had to do mainly out of convenience, and the fight sort of maybe just helped. But because they were sort of fighting for this equality, a lot of actual education sort of got desegregated in the North a little bit, not completely. I mean, obviously in the South, it was still an issue, and then we had the civil rights movement to really set standards in that. But the Depression really brought more people together, in a sense, who normally would not be together, okay? And this was done in order to save money. People realized that, like, we can't just throw money to this school and then throw money to the school. They said, just combine them. We don't have the funding anymore. We don't have the funding to be racist anymore. That sounds sad, but it's true. Even now we can sort of see what's going on in correlation to education. We have a lot of universities and colleges, which I forgot to mention. During the Great Depression, a lot of people stopped going to higher education for obvious reasons. There's no jobs to come from it, and there's a lack of money. People can't afford to go. And even now we have funding from colleges and stuff being funded, similar to the past where we have funding being cut from schools. We have student and teacher relationships changing with technology. It's almost like we're living in like this virtual connection when it comes to teachers and students. You're not getting that one-on-one sort of classroom effect. And we're also having some issues regarding the funding of schooling and how much it costs to actually be educated. We have such a high price tag on education. The cost of the degree is actually not pinning out to be worth it for a lot of people, depending on your major. So we're reevaluating the cost of education, just as we were doing before during the Great Depression, okay? And then we're also reevaluating how things are being done. How are we teaching people? Are we going to have like half online, half in school? Are we going to have to figure out a way to sort of get our message across in a different manner? Are we doing PowerPoint presentations? Are we doing a Zoom? Like, how are we getting this information and education across. And because we're doing it virtually, does it need to cost the same amount of price? A lot of people agree it shouldn't. A lot of students are actually suing colleges for their refunds, trying to get their money back. And a lot of schools are actually giving back money for tuition that was being given to them by students. And this is actually causing a lot of institutions to, in a way, almost go broke. But it's definitely, I don't know if it's completely broke, but it's definitely creating a good amount of financial instability. Another thing it's doing, especially in regards to HBCU school, is that we're starting to see how the lack of financial resources is really affecting these HBCU schools, is because they didn't really have a good amount of funding before. And sorry if there's a lawnmower here. With HBCU schools, they didn't really have a great amount of funding before, and there was also sort of a lack of, just a general lack of being able to, you know, keep up with the Joneses. Because of this pandemic and because of these losses in the economy, it's almost making things even more frustrating and making things even harder for schools like that, who even before had these lack of technology infrastructures in place. So for schools like that who can't afford to do Zoom, who can't afford to give their students laptops, whose families may not have laptops themselves, they're being placed in awkward positions where they're like, I can't even reach my students. I can't even connect with them because maybe they come from homes or backgrounds which they can't afford to, can't afford a computer, can't afford a laptop, needed to go to the library, needed to be on campus, had those scholarships, and now that is being taken away from them. So we can start to see again how this economy and how educational institutions are affecting the masses, as well as how it's affecting minority groups on a different level as well. And also we see that a lot of HBCU schools were not getting the same amount of funding as, let's say, state colleges. So there was just a general lack of support on state levels as well, where they would have schools that were not HBCU schools receiving significantly amount more funding than schools that were HBCU, which if you don't know what HBCU, it's historically black colleges. So once again, we have some issues of institutionalized racism and disparities between minority groups and everyone else in the country. Another area which is sort of like mirroring what's going on now and what was happening during the Great Depression is the issue of food. During the Great Depression, there was a lot of problems when it came to food. For farmers in particular, they kind of didn't have as much trouble as, let's say, someone who lived in the city, because back then farmers had a little bit more variety when it came to crops and what they grew versus after the Great Depression. And, you know, as 70 years, 80 years pass and time goes on, farmers become more specialized, is what we're sort of like dealing with now. There was some issues when it came to sort of like meats and stuff like that, but for the most part, farmers were sort of set up for survival. But you had people who lived in like cities and suburban areas, and maybe those who aren't farmers, who struggled quite a bit to get their food, to get supplies, to not starve to death. It just reminds me of this video. I used to watch this person all the time on YouTube. This woman has passed away now, but she would show sort of Great Depression cooking. And one of the Great Depression recipes that she had was a dandelion salad, which was people would sort of like go out in the yards and they would take dandelions and just pick them and put them all in a little basket and, you know, take them home, wash them, get the dirt off, get the dirt out of the dandelion, and maybe sprinkle, I don't know, some onions or some sort of vegetable on it, or maybe just salt and pepper or something like that, and eat dandelions. Okay, so you could see how there was like this scarcity towards food, especially in certain areas or certain groups of people. There's just this general need where people just feel like, hey, we don't have the supplies, we need to move forward, which is sort of happening now in a sense. Granted, things are more like people don't have maybe the money to buy food. It's not like we have a scarcity of product. It's more like how I gave the example before, where a lot of resources are just being tossed away and thrown aside. we just need to figure out a way how to get those sources to people. Now this is for current day and age. We have the Democrats wanting to create more food assistance benefits versus where we have the Republicans who want to take the waste that we have, or not even just the waste, but like meats that aren't being sold, dairy that's not being distributed, products that are not being distributed, and to directly distribute it to people in like 25-pound boxes. So both sides are sort of trying to create a solution to our food problem that we're having on. Another thing that you'll probably find interesting is food stamps definitely were created during the Great Depression, and food stamps is obviously there to assist people in purchasing food items or various like sort of items in the household which they may need because the demand was so great. And I believe that was done under the New Deal program. Because it brought about food stamps, we're seeing issues regarding food stamps going on today. And I was just reading an article where it was like they were saying the food stamp demand in New York had either tripled or doubled in the past couple of weeks since the beginning of the coronavirus. Like the demand is so high for them that the institutions basically they can't keep up, which is why the Democrats and Republicans are revisiting this solution and what food means to this country, how we can get it to people, how we can create a more flexible system. Another issue we are dealing with now that sort of relates and mirrors what we were going through the last time Uranus was in Taurus is the issue of security. And this almost links to the issue of morality as well. I think this is one of the most prevalent issues that's been coming up the most throughout the Uranus-Taurus transit. Back during the Great Depression, the issue of security mainly evolved around the FBI sort of establishing a stronger hold. Like I said, during the Great Depression, its main job, or what it really did, was give the government more power and more control. Okay, so the government institution, the FBI, started to gain more traction. So something that happened during the Great Depression is that the FBI's jurisdiction was expanded. So you know how before you have like state cops, you have local troops, and now the FBI today is like a global thing. Their jurisdiction expanded. They got more power. Another thing that happened as a result of the Great Depression is the FBI they had the power to arrest people. They were given the power to like have guns and badges, make arrests, and etc. And the reason this came about is because early on in the Great Depression, you had a lot of criminals which were being almost like celebrated in American society. Actually, a lot of them are still famous today. We have George Machine Gun Kelly, we have Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, you had Bonnie and Clyde. A lot of these people, like bank robbers and criminals, were being celebrated by Americans just because the Great Depression was so tense. Like people are just like, yeah, look at somebody taking the reins into their own hands. Look at somebody taking things into control. And because you have all these people crossing state lines, the FBI needed to gain more control and needed to gain more traction. A lot of criminals were arrested due to this, due to the fact that the FBI had more power within them and they didn't have to be like, oh, well, they went to New Jersey, so there's nothing I can do. Now they're able to do their jobs more effectively and to stop criminals. Now this was early on during the Depression. Actually, crime sort of lowered during the Great Depression just because you had a lot of people relating more to each other and connected. It's actually really funny in a sense because it's like everyone was so poor, they were just like, well, who do we steal from? So violence is beginning to drop. People are connecting more because now people are seeing each other more as like equals, and everyone wants to sort of help each other out, and they want to connect with each other. And I'm not going to say this is overall. There was obviously a lot of disparities when it comes to minority communities, but in general, crime rates dropped, I think like 20%. These violent crime rates dropped. I think thefts went down like 4% or something like that. And also Hollywood had a lot to do with this as well, where I think during the mid sort of Depression areas like the 1934, 1935, they started putting out a lot of movies having to do with G-men, which is like FBI people, and trying to make them look like really cool, trying to make them make Roosevelt look like this cool guy who was just like helping everybody out, who was stopping crime. They sort of glorified this image of FBI agents. I think even now today we still have like this glorified image of FBI agents stopping the bad guys, putting it into things. Like even during cop shows, like, you know, when FBI agents come in, it's almost like they're there to like save the day or something like that, or there's some conflict between the FBI agents and police. They're like, what are you doing with this crime scene? This isn't your jurisdiction. And the FBI agent comes in and it's just like, this is my scene now, or something like that, whatever. Another thing you saw just in general, which is mirroring some issues now when it comes to police. The police were sort of seen as just like everyday sort of like helpers. A lot of the communities had, not all of them, but a lot of communities had a good relationship with the police, and like I said, not all. And this relationship was like the police's job was not only to sort of like stop violent crime, but their job sort of became like to help low income families or help families that were in despair. It's like they would have police sort of go around looking for people who needed help, and they would give the families food, they would give the families clothing, they would like tell them like, oh, you can stay here, or here's a job for you. Like it was like the police's job was almost like they were doing the job of like what you would expect from like a church or something like that. It was a different experience for minority group who didn't really see a lot of benefit when it came to security, when it came to a lot of the New Deal programs, because the New Deal programs were really, they were given to local governments, and it was for the local government to hand out, oh, this person gets this job, this person gets this benefit, this person gets this funding. And a lot of the local governments were racist. A lot of the Black community and other minority communities, which I read because I know a lot of Asian communities didn't receive a lot of help either. Among African American communities, the crime rate rose just because a lot of the programs were not given towards African American people. There was not any funding being handed out. There were less jobs. And also with the Great Depression, you saw a lot of minority communities starting to make their way up north as well in order to pull away from the racism that was going on. But that security was, overall, there was less violent crime. Okay, so I just wanted to point that information out there. I think this is a good place to sort of like enter into the nakshatra portion of this video. If you're interested in that, let's stay tuned. We have 3 nakshatra placements which I want to mention for the Uranus and Taurus transit. And forgive my pronunciation, all right? Ashvini, Krittka, and Bharani. So let's start with Ashvini. So Ashvini nakshatra is ruled by Ketu. Ashvini is, like I said, it's similar to Uranus energy in general. Just Rahu and Ketu are very similar to Uranus energy, where they want to bring about innovation. They want to get rid of societal norms, and they want to almost push the envelope. From 1935 to 1937, Uranus was basically in Ashvini, and this transit brought about the world's first ever parking meters. So you see that Taurus energy coming into like a structure being set in place, somebody's paying money, as well as we're dealing with everyday sort of like societal norms and regulation, etc., like that, right? Social Security Act was also signed into effect when we had Uranus in Ashvini. And actually, I just read an article about Uranus, about the time like Uranus was in Ashvini. Right now, Uranus is in Bharani. I read it a few weeks ago regarding Social Security and how Social Security is draining. It's pretty much going to, I think they said it'd be dead in the next like 20-25 years or something like that. Maybe even less than that, because of the current economic downfall. A lot of people are cashing out of their Social Security, a lot of older people, and a lot of younger people aren't, because they don't have jobs. There is nothing being taxed. So there's no Social Security tax being implemented. But it's no surprise that the issue of Social Security is coming up again, because during Ashvini we had that innovation, that new idea being set in place. Ashvini is the thing that sort of just like, it's like that match. It strikes the fire, but it's like, we don't know what to do with it yet. We just kind of know that it's there. Ketu is known as a headless figure. It's known as not having any foresight, not knowing what's next, doing impulsive things. So it's not surprising that we have a great many deal of errors when it comes to things being started during Ashvini. Not to say this is not one of the best placements for something to start something. Actually, it's probably one of the greatest places. I think this is why the sun is exalted here, because like you have like this placement that wants to innovate, that wants to create, but like there needs to be more than one draft, right? So Social Security is being depleted. There's no FICA tax being taken out of taxes. And I said Social Security more than likely will be bankrupt by 2030. That's not that far away, guys. We're in 2020. So the government needs to take action regarding that. The government needs to take action regarding a lot of things. We need to look at a different system set in place for retirement. Are we going to up the retirement age, or are we going to start taxing people more? Are we going to start taking more money out of people's checks? There's a lot of ways we could sort of handle this situation that need to be investigated and that need to be thought about. Also, I should say that this act came into place during Uranus retrograde. And what I've noticed is when something is sort of established in a retrograde, you're gonna have to revisit it a little bit more than you normally would revisit an issue. So when Uranus goes retrograde back into Ashvini, that issue is going to be revisited, or if it just goes retrograde, Uranus goes retrograde in general, more than likely that issue will come up. I should also mention that Uranus was in Ashvini when Hitler hosted the Olympic Games, and obviously there was a lot of fights and protests, but I will say the energy was not as amplified as it would be in the other nakshatras. This time around with Ashvini, we had a lot of issues regarding gun violence, and a lot of the Ketu ruled nakshatras have to do with gun violence. In fact, I think there's quite a few school shooters that have like I haven't done a complete study, so I'm not going to just throw this out there, but I've seen a lot of charts of school shooters have a lot of Ketu placements, which is like Ashvini, Mula, Magha. So like Ketu ruled placements tend to have that association with violence. As well as I believe Hitler actually has his sun in Ashvini, which I really wasn't shocked at. Like it's just a placement that's known to being very violent. It's not the only placement though, trust me. There's plenty of other nakshatra placements that create that sort of intensity energy. Violence in general becomes a problem when we have Ashvini coming into effect. This time around we had immigrant families being separated from each other. We have these sort of social issues popping up regarding gun control, regarding immigration, regarding separation. There's just a lot more happening this time, but we also have some innovation going on as well, some movement forward, as Ashvini does want to do that. So we had AOC become the youngest woman ever to be elected into the United States Congress. And also in Saudi Arabia, we have women, the ban on women driving ending. I don't even know if this is innovation, but this is more like a first. We have the first time ever in history a US president meeting with a North Korean leader. So this was Donald Trump's, you know, thing. So we had some other sort of like small innovation processes where the swimsuit edition portion of the Miss American pageant came to an end. When it comes to women, there was like a bit of a step forward because we are coming out of that the Me Too movement where Uranus was in Revati, and it's ending sort of like the sexual punishment almost like of women. So with Ashvini, there's going to be a lot of firsts, but there's also going to be a rise in tension and a rise in violence. And specifically in America, when we had Ashvini and the gun control laws, once again, we have this sort of perspective versus like the North versus the South. So more Southern states are obviously against gun control versus more northern states are mainly for gun control. Or you could split it even this way, where we have the Democrats versus the Republicans. Last time we were dealing with the destruction of the Whig Party, and I believe there was another party that sort of rose up, the know-nothings, right? So the know-nothings and the Whig Party died last time, and it became the rise of the Republican Party last time. I don't know if there's going to be a disintegration of a party this time, but it does seem like more than likely there will be some political reform. You could just refer back to the beginning of the video where I mentioned all the associations, where I went into a radical sort of like social change, radical different structures, new structures, which would be new groups. Like I said before, it wouldn't be surprising if a new political group formed or if another political group disintegrated, okay? I'm pretty sure something funky is going to go on with the election as well. So let's get into the next nakshatra, which is where we are currently at with Bharani. So Bharani is ruled by Venus, and when I first started looking into nakshatras, I was like, not Venus. Venus has got to be real peaceful, right? It's like, when you think of Venus, you think like lovely, artistic, feminine. My goodness, Venus was one of the most headstrong planets that I've seen. I was not expecting the results when I was looking up Bharani nakshatra, or even just like Venus ruled people. What tends to happen is when people have a lot of Venus Venusian energy is they become very, very political, and they become very aware of the social standards and the social norms, which is no surprise why Venus is Libra and in Taurus. This is where Venus is naturally at home. I wasn't too shocked by that, but at the same time, I was like, oh, right, why didn't I think of that? Of course. So a lot of people who have Venusian energy will sort of be known for their political beliefs, or they'll be known for their ideals. It doesn't even have to be political beliefs. It could just be overall beliefs. Like, you get known for your views on gender. You get known for your views on gun control. You get known for, you know, your views on parenting or something like that. Like, people just get known for their beliefs, or they might get known for their beauty as well. The energy of Bharani in particular that I've noticed, this is where we have energies coming to a head, okay? We have people who are saying this is exactly how it needs to be, and then you have another group saying this is exactly how it needs to be, and that's Bharani energy. So if you guys follow me on Instagram, you guys know I did a study. I think I put it on this channel as well. I know I put it on this channel. I did a study on wealth nakshatras, like what makes somebody wealthy. One of the mercurial placements that was very, very popular to make someone wealthy was someone having their Mercury in Bharani. If you don't know what Mercury is, it's your speech, it's your intellect. So when I started looking at Bharani people, what I realized is they have a strong inability to compromise. They're the type of person where if they enter a negotiation, if you enter a negotiation with somebody with their Mercury and Bharani, they'll be so extreme in their negotiation that it's like, okay, I can't even reason with this person. Let's say they're selling a car, and they're selling the car for like $3,000, and you come up to them and you say, okay, I'll give you $250, $2,500 for it, okay? They're going to look at you and say, no, the car costs $3,000. And you're gonna be like, okay, well, I don't want to spend that money. And they're just like, but it's a nice car, and you approach me and you want the car, so it costs $3,000. They are not going to move from their position. They say you either buy the car or you get lost. And that's the energy we're sort of like dealing with now. You have people who are saying, hey, we need to do something about the police brutality, the police violence. There are issues involving security in this country where we are killing Black people and other minorities at a disproportionate rate, and there's a lot of systemic racism going on. And then you have a lot of people, especially the police, pushing back on the issue for some reason. I mean, who are saying, no, I don't agree. We need to keep things at the same. We don't need to defund the police. We don't need, you know, these body cams. We don't need somebody, some higher authority to tell us what's right, what's wrong, and how we can effectively do our job. So you have people who are butting heads and saying, this is how things should be. And if you don't think the way I think, well, you're dumb, you're an idiot, you're crazy, you don't understand the truth, da 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 da. It's an energy where people are not going to see eye to eye. I'm not gonna lie, guys. Let me give you some information on last time. So last time we had Uranus in Bharani. There was an event that took place. It was on May 30th, 1937. It's the event known as the Memorial Day Massacre. So this event is when police opened fire on an unarmed crowd. They killed about 10 people and injured about 50. None of the police were prosecuted. You could see how this created a lot of tension regarding the police and people in regards to police brutality, right? We have this issue of police brutality coming up. Like, this is not new, okay? Like I said, Uranus and Taurus energy is going to pretty much repeat itself until things come to a place where there is a balance, where there is a meet in the middle section. So even in 1937, there were strong issues regarding police brutality, especially when it came to protesting. And I believe the protesting was about labor and wages or something. It's just another instance where we have police killing unarmed citizens, same as we have with George Floyd, same as we have with other black people who are being killed, and other minorities are being having excessive force. Not even just minorities, even people who are protesting now who are not minorities are being killed and attacked and have excessive force being used on them once again when Uranus is in Bharani. Last time the police were not charged. This time we actually have police, or not charged or arrested. This time we have the police being arrested. Whether they are convicted, that's a different story. Maybe they won't be convicted and we'll have to wait till Uranus comes into Bharani again before this issue comes again. Or we have to wait until Saturn goes into Aquarius again, where we deal with another social issue. We don't know where this is going to lead, but we can use the astrology to sort of give us an example where it's going to show us we need to make these corrections now. People setting up their own rules for what they believe is just and what they believe is right, that doesn't align with society, or they feel like they're being ignored by society, so why should society's rules apply to them? Okay, why should they listen to that price of $3,000, right? Why don't they just steal the car? So it's like we're at that point when we have Uranus in Bharani. Some small things that happened when Uranus went into Bharani that kind of makes sense is we actually introduced spam, which is like everyone knows that weird mystery meat. Like, I think it's just a combination of different meats. And you know, with the Venus energy, it represents sort of like food. Actually, now we have spam making innovations again, where now spam introduced its first sort of vegan meat, actually. So right now, and it's like omni pork. Another thing that I thought was interesting was the Marijuana Tax Act was introduced during this time. And this tax act eventually led to the criminalization of marijuana. Okay, so I'm not like pro or against marijuana or anything. I just thought it was just interesting. So it seems like Bharani has to do more with consumption than Ashvini. Ashvini is more like the innovation violence part, while Bharani is like, okay, this is my beliefs and also this is what I eat. You are what you eat, or you are what you consume. What I mean by that is you are what you eat, meaning the food you eat is important to regulating your system and making you healthy, strong, giving you ideas, okay? And as well as you are what you consume, which has to do with, you know, the media, the ideas, the people you surround yourself by, society, and etc. That's more Bharani's sort of energy. And the whole reason I wanted to sort of mention also the Marijuana Tax Act is because I also read something, this was on the .com, I believe was the name of the site, and it says Canadian scientists scientists identified grains of cannabis sativa that they believe could aid in the prevention and the treatment of COVID-19. More than likely, during Uranus in Taurus, they're going to revisit the legalization of marijuana, especially if it has benefits into preventing and treating COVID-19. Also, I kind of wanted to mention, which I thought was very interesting. So you know how I said the Hierophant is connected to the Pope? So in 1939, the Pope actually died and was replaced, and which was very interesting because it's very symbolic of new ideas and new tradition. This Pope in particular refused to sort of make a strong enough stance against the Holocaust, which, like I said, with Bharani energy, it's like saying, pick a side. Like, you can't, this middle down the line stuff, you're gonna be attacked for playing the fence, okay? This Pope was seen as sort of playing the fence, so people had a lot of harsh criticism of him because of this. This Bharani energy will force you to sort of like, not even force you, but you're gonna encounter a lot of people who are going to have very, very, very strong opinions. So if you're somebody who is more like wants to see everything from different perspectives and gain some ideas, you're more than likely going to be attacked a lot during this time. And if you're somebody who's very like opinionated, or you feel like you just have a strong sense of what it is that you believe or what you value, then you're gonna find yourself in a lot of frustration or possibly stress when it comes to other people not agreeing with your train of thought. Even now, I want to say I've seen a lot of posts like that are just pretty much similar to this energy that I'm just talking about, where I've seen a lot of people say, you know, either you speak up or you're a part of that social injustice that's going on, okay? Or I've seen people say, I'm unfollowing all the people who aren't supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, it's this very, you're either with me or you're against me. Like, there's no room for like lukewarm energy. Now we're gonna move on to Krittka, which is a sun-ruled nakshatra. Now, Kritka's symbol is the knife, and it is a very it can be a very, very violent nakshatra, similar to Ashvini. Like I said, Ashvini, you can look at it like the match. Bharani is like, okay, what do we do with the match? And you can look at Krittka as starting a fire. This is where all the energy heightens, okay? This is where people start acting no longer contained, okay? Like, and you're gonna be like, oh, are people contained now? Well, you know, it gets more intense. The last time Uranus went into Krittka, we had the start of the Holocaust. So we had the first mass group of Jewish people being sent off into gas chambers. But now we're having this genocide energy come in, where now people are being killed on mass levels. Before then, when we had Uranus in Krittka, this was right before the Civil War, okay? So this was right before the South seceded from the Union, where there is a likelihood that the violence level, the argumentative level, the level in which people are going to fight for their beliefs is going to amp up. Uranus isn't in Krittka now, but Uranus enters Krittka like around June 13th, 2022. Okay, so we have like 2 years before it really enters into Krittka. But when it does, I'm not gonna lie, I would expect the energy the conflict to rise. I really would expect that. I don't want to be like scaring people though and be like, oh, we're gonna have another genocide or we're gonna have another civil war, but the conflicts that we are experiencing now will be amplified if they are not resolved. Another event that took place when Uranus entered Krittka, and this was before the Civil War, but things were pretty much going in that direction, is we had Charles Sumner, who was like this anti-slavery political figure, who made this speech sort of like degrading people who were pro-slavery. He ended up being caned in his office. Like another politician ended up just like beating him to the point where he was almost dead, because we had someone just openly be so violent. Could you imagine like Congress like beating each other like today? Like if just like I just really can't imagine like the politicians like physically attacking each other. They were in such a great conflict that they couldn't even solve it with words. They really just turned towards violence. But this event sort of inspired the Potawatomi massacre. The Potawatomi massacre of 1856. This was when John Brown, who was like an abolitionist, so he was anti-slavery, he decided to take several men to the town of Potawatomi, which was like a pro-slavery town, and he decided to kill James Doyle and his sons in the middle of the night. They were pro-slavery people, leaders in that community. And for him, he said it was basically to set an example of them. He was kind of like saying, hey, this is what we're going to do to people who are pro-slavery. We're just going to kill them. We're going to hack them to death. And I'm just going to make an example out of them. And this Potawatomi massacre only amplified the tensions in the South. Like this was one of the main events that sort of like really put that fire into the South, being like, hey, we gotta secede from these people. But it wasn't until like, you know, Lincoln came into power that the South was like, in weeks, they were like, you know, we out. We're not, you're not our president. We're seceding from the Union. Lincoln was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was the straw before the straw broke the camel's back. The reality is like a lot of Kritika's energy often leads to war. Right now we have people who are obviously against institutional racism versus the government who institutional racism seems to benefit. We have people, you know, for gun control, against gun control. We have people for immigration, you know, against immigration. There's just a lot of things that's causing a lot of separation. And a lot of it has to do this time around with political parties in particular. It's almost like political parties have been becoming like sports teams, like where people are just like sort of almost backing them just to back them, to be honest. But like that's just my opinion, so don't take offense to that. Or you could take offense. Do what you want. Also, this is like a small sort of like astrology fact that I sort of stumbled upon. I actually stumbled upon a lot of different facts, but I found like Krittika energy is really known for like spying. If you see a lot of uncovering of spying or information being revealed, secret information, I wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, this energy begins in 2022. A lot of Krittika people have this sort of like sneaky nature, which you wouldn't sort of associate with a sun-ruled nakshatra, but when you think about it, yes, the sun rules enlightenment. So what do spies do? They know things that other people don't know, right? So they're enlightened. They're more informed. They're more in the know. The sun also rules sort of like intelligence as well as information, right? Because through information we gather intelligence. Last time Uranus was in Krittika, the FBI discovered a network of Japanese spies, and these spies were discovered, and they were sort of like extricated, and they were like, you know, pushed out of the United States. They weren't like arrested for some reason, but they were like, okay, you got to get out of here. Like, you've been spying on us. You've been spying on our naval bases. But they collected all the spies' data. However, it took like about a year to interpret them. So this was in 1941. So the US already knew that Japan was going to plan an attack. So the person who sort of led this network of spies in the US, he actually was part of the team which planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. So the information that we discovered during Uranus's transit through Krittika is probably going to be crucial to some sort of historical event taking place. Now, the government may not even reveal this to us, but they may or may not. You know what I mean? Information these days is so loose and so out there. I would say keep an eye out on things, even just on a personal level. If you find a lot of information and things being revealed to you during that time in your personal life, I would say keep an eye on that information. It could be something positive. Like somebody mentioned something about like some job opportunities becoming available in California. You may be like, okay, well, that sounds cool, but my job's good, right? And then you find out you get fired, and all of a sudden that information becomes relevant to you. And I think in 2022, because I also saw that we had Jupiter and Neptune entering conjuncting at some point. Jupiter and Neptune creates like martyrs for a cause. So like I said, how we had the Potawatomi massacre as well as Charles Sumner sort of being attacked, and these things became like symbols for their own causes. Like Charles Sumner became like a symbol for anti-slavery, and we had the Potawatomi massacre becoming a symbol for like, look how the North is suppressing us, look how they're trying to control us, and they became a symbol for being pro-slavery in a sense. So you may have an event take place that becomes like a martyr. So I know we also have George Floyd, which he's almost like a symbol now, but I'm telling you, there's more than likely going to be somebody else or some of other event, 2022 or something around there, that somebody's going to be like a symbol for like a cause, one of the causes and conflicts that we are going through at the moment, and that's going to propel people forward. So from my sense and what I've sort of like gathered from all this information is, you know how when you have water and oil and you can't just quite mix water and oil together, like they just won't stick together. It's kind of like how we have now when we have like these different political beliefs, people just aren't going to come together. People just are not going to see eye to eye. The only way you can get water and oil to come together is if you have an emulsifier. So it's almost like we need an emulsifier for society. We need a way to bring people together because people are just not going to see eye to eye. And that's just my 2 cents at the end. Now I'm going to move on to the personal transits. I can't even believe I've been talking this long. These transits are going to be whole sign, and this is going to be using Western astrology. I'm not going to go into nakshatras for each placement. This can go if you are for your rising sign, your moon sign, or your sun sign. If you are in an Aries sun, moon, or rising, this transit is happening in your second house. So you can expect a major financial shift over the next couple of months. This transit can be an energy where you feel highly compelled to express yourself, as Taurus rules the voice, right? So people will sort of see you as somebody who's kind of can be very opinionated, or they'll see you as somebody whose beliefs or values can be very different from their own or very unusual, or you just have a quality about you where people are just like, that's an interesting thing to say. Like, it doesn't have to be all negative all the time, right? But sometimes with this transit, people can kind of see you as somebody who thinks outside the box or who thinks outside the norm, okay? This transit for Aries is about getting your voice out there. So if you're somebody who is a very creative person, like let's say you're writing a book, you're writing a song, you are doing some sort of artwork, some way in which you are expressing yourself in a creative manner. This transit, like I said, can be all about getting your voice out there, like blogs, YouTube channels, plays, Facebook groups, websites. It's just putting what you think and expressing yourself out there in the world. However, with this transit, there can be a lot of criticism regarding your thoughts, your opinions, the ways you express yourself. People are going to just, man, they are not going to see the world the way you see the world, Aries, okay? So stand strong in your convictions. Don't be afraid to, learn from others as well. Your thoughts are meaningful. This transit can create power struggles with authority figures as well. You may also sort of reevaluate your self-worth and how you see yourself or how you perceive yourself to be. And that's going to change significantly by the time this transit ends, okay? So also another thing with this transit, it can kind of put you on a diet or make you change your diet in some manner or radical way or something like that. Finances can take unexpected turns. You can also have multiple jobs, multiple streams of revenue, or you can find yourself kind of changing jobs frequently over the next couple of years. So Taurus rising, this transit is affecting you all over your entire life. So you can expect a major shift in finances, how your income is affecting pretty much all areas of your life, or even just how your social interactions are affecting all areas of your life. So let's say you live in like a small community, you may think, okay, I kind of want more diversity. I want more interactions with people who sort of think similar to me. Maybe you kind of feel like you're in a community where you can't fully express yourself the way you want to express yourself, and you want different social dynamics. So you may even consider like moving or something like that. Like I said, this transit will pretty much affect pretty much every area of your life for you. Also, like I said, with you guys, Taurus in particular, because this is transiting your body. Sometimes your Uranus can give like an appearance that's a little bit quirky, a little bit out there, a little bit unusual. So people can sort of say, oh, you dyed your hair green. That's interesting. Uranus people in general just have a very unique style. You could wear like lots of different jewelry. You could be testing out your own different looks, etc. So it just kind of changes your appearance. Also, like I said, I said the same with Aries, where it can change your diet. So any sort of house, like I was saying before, having to do with the 12th, 1st, 2nd house, sixth house is going to have to do with body image and what you consume and what you put into you. So you can also see, you may even like physically sort of like change. Maybe it's just like you do your makeup differently or something like that. But definitely when you have Uranus go through your first house, it's a lot of different experiments with the wardrobe, a lot of different experiments with how you look, a lot of different changes to your appearance, where that's you gaining weight, losing weight, gaining muscle. Like I said, Uranus also have that connection with Saturn. So a lot of times when Uranus can go through your first house, you can sort of build muscle as well, because Saturn does rule muscle, and it has that connection with Uranus, as Uranus rules the 11th house, which is what Saturn traditionally rules, okay? There may also be some disenchantment in certain areas of your life. While there may be a lot of excitement when it comes to sort of like relationships and your social interactions, it can just kind of put you at odds with other people as well, because when you have Uranus in your first house, that means it's aspecting your 7th house, and so you're coming across people that are very different than you. So even if you're stuck inside, you may be on the internet arguing with people on vlogs and Twitter and YouTube or Instagram or something like that. So you're just going to find yourself sometimes in some situations where you are a little bit at odds with others. This transit can also pull you away from what is popular. What I mean by that is you can start listening to like more underground artists, or you could start getting into more international movies and stuff. It's just a transit that wants you to be almost like hipster. It's like a hipsterish energy, right? Where you're just not following what's popular. You're not going and you're not excited by the norm. You want something different. You want something new. And with you, Taurus, it's almost like it's in every area of your life. You just want things to be radically different. You want things to change. You just want new innovation and excitement to come about for you in your life. Also, I want to say with this transit, if you're somebody who is very into social media, what this can do is it can kind of split your audience, and it can give them very mixed feelings about you, or it can make you, for them, it's not like you're some people may find you dislikable, but like what it really does is kind of like people will see you and they may either get really jealous, or they may get like very hostile, or they may misinterpret your message, or it just kind of gives like a very polarizing view overall, where people just kind of they're like, I don't get it. Like, it's like one day you got it, the next day you don't. Like, so if you're in social media, if you have some sort of following, then yeah, it's going to give a very polarizing view for you. This transit can also sort of put you in the limelight, because like I said, Uranus is sort of like Rahu, Ketu energy. And it's because you're going to be so innovative and you're going to be so different and creative that people are going to take notice of you, whether that is your style, whether that your opinions, whether that's how you just, you know, look or how you live your life. It's like people start paying a little bit more attention because you come off as this unicorn. Okay, so Tauruses, you guys are going to come off like a unicorn to people. They're going to be like, oh, what's going on with you? Okay. Another thing is you can, this can bring about some sort of separation, or it can bring about marriage. This can also bring a new love interest, instant attraction, love at first sight. Sometimes it gives a reputation, like I said, with Jim Carrey, where you can be like kind of give a lot of mood swings or be very controversial, or some people might be like, oh, that person is difficult to work with. And I only say that because Uranus is aspect in the 7th, and the 7th house can be sort of like your reputation. It's like the 10th from the 10th, so it's that public image of you. So sometimes people can see you that way. Doesn't mean that's necessarily the reality. So with Gemini, we have Uranus transiting your 12th house. So you can find yourself in the background in terms of work. For example, like if you work in the film industry, you might be doing more like script writing rather than being in like front of the camera or something like that. It really depends on your other transits though, on what's going to happen. You'll have a lot of imagination during this time and a lot of different sort of like ideas and inspiration, because in Uranus represents like those creative genius moments. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So Oscar Wilde had Uranus transit his 12th house in Taurus when he thought of Citizen Kane and when he started sort of writing that information, okay? And Citizen Kane is often represented as being one of the greatest films of all time. So he had this like creative spark going through his head. He also sort of, he also released his adaptation of War of the Worlds, which if you don't know, so War of the Worlds was this radio program about alien invasion, and people at the time, they didn't know that it was fake. So they were just listening to the radio and they were hearing, oh my God, aliens have landed and they're coming to Earth and they're being destroyed, and people are just listening in their houses and they're like, oh my God, aliens are on Earth. It was so realistic that people just were freaking out and they really thought aliens were being invaded. So it was just this huge moment in radio history where you had somebody having so much power and control over what the world thought. The world really thought they were, at least in America, thought they were being invaded by aliens for like a hot minute. So it's just like these wild creative moments when you have Uranus in the 12th house. As well, sometimes it's because it's aspecting the 6th house, it can create a little bit of a burden when it comes to sort of work, or you may feel like your inner world is probably the most exciting part of your day in that sense, because Uranus is just like that bubbling energy of creativity, and you may feel like you're not getting that from the real world. The real world can come off very dull compared to your inner life. Another thing this transit will do is it can bring up a lot of buried memories because it is a 12th house transit. So you may have a great deal of emotional releases, sadness, anger, happiness, whatever. It's like a trip down memory lane. And you know how Uranus is like that sporadic energy. So you could just be walking, living your life, and all of a sudden you just remember how you lost your dog during your childhood, and you're just like, oh my God, like that was a sad moment. And you're just going to just have like these memories come back to you full force, and you just start analyzing what this means for you, how you take this, how you can let go of any burdens that you may have. You may even want to enter counseling or join therapy. This transit is also about sort of breaking old patterns. So when analyzing your behavior from the past, you may even notice you have some patterns that you want to get rid of or you want to break or get out of the habit of. This transit can also expose secret enemies. And you can also find yourself traveling sometimes, you know, it's kind of different. We're in a weird time period. Like some people travel a lot during this period, but since we're in such a weird time period, you may just be mentally traveling, really. Another thing is, like I said, because this transit is aspecting the 6th house, it's also a change in eating habits, whether that's you eating more, eating less, or just testing out different like lifestyles of what you like, cooking less, cooking more, eating out more, eating out less. It's just a different transit during this time. I will say during this time period where Judy Gardner had this transit, Uranus in Taurus, during the last time she Judy Gardner, sorry, I just saw like my neighbor's dog like peeing on the nail box, like what. So Judy Gardner had this transit of Uranus and Taurus in her 12th house during this time period. And like I said, it's really affected her dietary lifestyle, because the studio was trying to control everything that she ate or consumed. And it was actually during this time period which she became her lifelong pill addiction. So that's I hope I'm not mentioning like all these negative things and you're just like, oh my God, Brandy, everything you say is like so toxic. But like, no, I'm just trying to like give you a heads up of what this can mean, because I don't want it to sound like it's all like fairy dust and rainbows. This can be some very serious issues that can come up. So you should not only look at the house that Uranus and Taurus is transiting, you should look at the house opposite to it, because it really will affect it. And so the habits that you want to establish during Uranus and Taurus, this is not like a transit that you want to just like ignore and say, okay, well, 7 years of that has gone by and now it's over. No, this can really create some habits that you have for the rest of your life. So be mindful of the decisions that you make during this time period. Try to uplift yourself the best that you can given the circumstances. So Cancer rising or Cancer sun, moon, etc. This transit is happening in your 11th house of social networks, friends, incomes, and, you know, gains and benefits, right, from your work. So this is a time where you can reevaluate your friendships and your support systems. You can start looking for more ways to sort of stabilize your income, and you can have more than one source of income. You can be more involved in communities or subcultures or spiritual communities like tarot and astrology. You may even find yourself making friends with people you may not have traditionally made friends with before, or find yourself in situations with people or in groups that you didn't know much about before. Okay, maybe you're learning more about different groups and social activities and etc. like that. You can increase your need to reach out for others, like whether you're like quarantine or not quarantine. It's like you're almost like reaching out towards people, whether that's through social media or some online community and something like that. Like I personally was just kind of looking up like different tarot communities, and I know a lot of different sort of tarot groups are trying to are actually starting some online forums and having a lot of online presentations as well. So if you're a Cancer rising, you may find yourself in that situation where you're kind of being a part of like these online communities, as well as you can sort of like look into sort of like online dating as well, because like I said, Uranus will be in your 11th house, which means it's accessing or aspecting your 5th house, which is the house of romance, dating, as well as like close friends too. I've seen the 5th house represent just like friends in general. Okay, so you can sort of experience like different like social sort of like party situations, or you can find yourself making friends with different people from different cultures, as I said before. One thing I will point out is sometimes with Uranus energy is the friendships made during this transit can be like they come and go. And I'm not saying they aren't long lasting, because you can build long lasting relationships during this transit, but most of the friendships that you're going to make are going to be usually very seasonal, I've noticed, and also can bring a lot of surprises, good and bad, in regards to your friend groups. People can do some things that really shock you and take you off guard. Okay, another thing which may seem contrasting, but I've seen this happen before, where you're sort of meeting people, but they're almost like acquaintances. So oftentimes when Uranus transits people's 11th house, a lot of people feel alone. So it's like they're meeting all of these people, but they feel so alone. Okay, they feel like people don't quite understand them. So You can feel like a loner at certain parts of this transit or even throughout the transit, no matter how many people you seem to be like meeting, okay? So for Leo risings, this is happening in your 10th house, and now's the time to sort of like expand your reputation or grow your achievements and become more recognized. A lot of the times when we have Uranus go through our 10th house, it can kind of create it can create a long-lasting reputation. And what I mean by that, like, let's say you're somebody who's you sell flowers. So Uranus goes through your 10th house and you build up this reputation for selling like the most beautiful, creative bouquets. Okay, so Uranus going through your 10th house can create like this boost in popularity in a sense. Okay, another thing it can do is for some people, it can create a period in your life where you find yourself changing jobs more frequently than you normally would, or you kind of feel like your work environment seems a little bit, spastic, or you feel like there's not a lot of stability within your work environment because Uranus energy rules surprises, right? Or like protests and riots and stuff like that. So Uranus energy can be a little bit chaotic sometimes. Or you just may find that your work environment has a lot of just diversity within it. Okay, it's going to be different for everyone, right? Like I said, this can bring coworkers and upper management for various different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, sexualities. You may find yourself interacting with very, very different people at work, okay, and work-related situations over the next couple of years, okay? And this can also be about developing your relationship with clientele, okay? So, like I said, expanding your reputation as well. And like I said before with Jim Carrey, with him naturally having Uranus in his 10th house, it creates a very polarizing reputation sometimes. Not always. Sometimes people just kind of see you as silly, like the Fool card, right? So the Fool card is known for being comedic, childlike, and you can even look at Jim Carrey's sort of like his most famous movies like The Mask and etc. like that, where he comes, or Dumb and Dumber, where he comes off like being like literally the fool in Dumb and Dumber. It's kind of funny how literal that is, but so you have this reputation of maybe being like silly or funny or like very childlike, or people just see you as just a very free-spirited, fun person, okay? When we you can also tackle a lot of different goals during this time period, and just because Uranus energy is so spread out, you may find yourself accomplishing a great deal of many tasks, and you can feel like you just have this overwhelming energy and excitement around them, especially new experiences in your home life as well, because it aspects the 4th house. I found Uranus aspects to the 4th house can really just bring about like renovations within the home, or just having you live in different places based on your situation and what's going on through you. It could literally just be like, well, I guess before the pandemic, it would have been like people going off to college or something, or living in a dorm, or getting their first apartment, etc. like that. It can still mean those things of like getting your first apartment and stuff. Depends on where you are in the world, where if things have situated and things have opened up for you, okay? And this is over the course of several years, so hopefully we do find some sort of cure situation where we have this. But it can create a lot of different ups and downs in your home life as well. A lot of different polarizing views when it comes to how you agree things should be done at work. You may have some disagreements with authority figures ahead of you, okay? It can also indicate more like work trips, going into different areas as well, or just feeling like you're compelled to go somewhere because of work. It just does that. And you also may feel like bosses or colleagues kind of just like come and go. Like you just like feel like you see them one day and now they're gone, or like a colleague as well. They're there and then they're not there. So with Virgo rising, this transit is happening in your 9th house, and you can find yourself sort of traveling to a different country, different state, different region, different part of the country. It's really just about opening your worldview and your world experiences, Virgo. So you may feel this transit is encountering people who have some interesting spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, okay? Or you just encountering people who are from like way different cultural backgrounds than you, or just way different ways of perceiving reality than you do. which everyone's going to experience, but you in particular, Virgo, you guys are really gonna get a lot of that. For you, like in particular, this is a transit in which you, for a lot of people, or at least a lot of Virgos, can become a citizen of another country, or they can return home to their own country, in a sense. This transit can also sort of like lead to a more popular social life as it aspects the third house, and third house is social interactions and ninth house is like the higher version of social interactions. So there's a lot of like, a lot of just hanging out, okay, going on with this transit, okay, just meeting people. This transit is really good for information gathering. So if you have a job which gives you a lot of research, or if you're in school and you need to write a dissertation or an essay, if you're just in school and you need to write something, this is a great transit for essays and studying and etc. Like, this is just an amazing transit for that. You'll learn so much. I don't know why my voice cracked there. You learned so much, okay? This transit also comes with a great deal of just expanding your knowledge in general. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with just schooling. This could just be knowledge on pop culture. Maybe you just learn what Kylie Jenner's favorite color is. Like, it doesn't even have to be something super informative or useful, but you may find yourself, you know, learning a lot of useless information as well, okay? But it's just an information gathering sort of like transit. As I said, this energy is reflective of Sagittarius, which is about, you know, higher belief systems and understanding the law, and you may even find yourself in a commitment because, like I said, this transit represents legal commitments as well. So whether that's committing to a marriage, committing to a business contract, committing to something, it just represents legal contracts. So you may be signing quite a few of those, which could affect your life for a good amount of periods. Okay. So Josephine Baker actually had this transit during the Great Depression. And I think it was at this time where she was living in France and she decided to return home to the US to sort of like, you know, promote herself, be more popular. But obviously she experienced a lot of racism being a Black woman, but she didn't experience that same amount of racism in France. So I guess she got really comfortable in France, and so she was like, oh, I'll return to America. And so she returned to America, and she was met with not welcoming arms. So a lot of criticism, a lot of racism that went on for her during that time period. But she also became like a spy. So she literally gathered information on other people for her government. So which she became a French citizen after she returned home, and she also married someone. So she pretty much hit every single area of that transit where she had the higher commitment thing, the information gathering thing, the traveling thing. And she traveled to various different countries, meeting people of different cultures, because that's how she gathered her information. So she would meet like German troops and just like meet them at parties and just like entertain them. And then she would like get information from them. So she literally just like hit every single area of that transit. So that could be you guys spying for the French. Libra rising, let us get to you. This transit is happening in your 8th house. This is very interesting. So you could actually find yourself, this is weird because I can't say you're going to completely draw away from the public eye, but sometimes it does that. But sometimes for people, it pushes them towards it. So it's like whatever you're doing, like if you're away from the public eye, you may find yourself in it. If you are somebody who's in the public eye, you may find yourself withdrawing. So I would just say for this transit, it can go either way. It's an 8th house thing. You know, 8th house is just like these extreme ups and downs, like left and right, up and down. It's just like, it's just it's a strange house. It's a house that rules crisis situations. It's a house that rules like emergency funds, taxes, has to do with power struggles and psychological problems going on there as well as ghosts and the occult. So this transit is really like about the hopes and wishes that you have for work, because this house actually is the 11th from the 10th house, making it the hopes and wishes of what you want work to be like, but it may not actually be like that. You know what I mean? So, so 8th house is that energy where you feel like, oh, I want this radical reform and change to go on at work. Now, whether that happens, We don't know. We don't know. There's definitely going to be some energy with coming in, especially in your work environment, that's going to throw you for a loop, because this is an 8th house transit. You're going to be thrown for a loop, like without a doubt. So this transit can suddenly bring like financial abundance, or you may find like you're getting more support from other people, whether that is emotional, whether that's financial, whether that's just from a practical level, they're just giving you advice. Or you're just feeling like you're getting more relief or assistance from people. And I think in general, a lot of people are just getting assistance in general from the government, right? So this can represent sort of also disagreements when it comes to people you believe to have close relationships or bonds with, or just people who are like the public. So this is another transit, like like Aries transit, where you can find yourself in conflict with other people. But from your perspective, other people are going to have like the more radical beliefs. You're going to find the behaviors, the language, and the actions of others to be a bit out there. Okay, you're going to find that like you're like, whoa, this person is very opinionated in their point of view, or this person has a very strict way of doing things. Okay, and that could be in your work environment, that could be in your marriage, that could be in your friendships. Like, it's just really just your relationships overall with people. You're gonna find that people are having like viewpoints, and it's like you can't ignore it, because it's like it's gonna seem like almost everyone's going to at some point maybe get into some sort of disagreement. Okay, so like I said, this can bring disagreements in your work life and your workplace, as well as like some sort of power struggle as well, because like I said, 8th house rules power struggle. So you may even find yourself running into some power struggles quite often, or it just seems like out of nowhere that you may be running into these crisis situations. These situations may be involving like the police, or involving like an ambulance, or involving like just a lot of psychological events that might be traumatizing to some people, because the 8th house does rule trauma. Actually, a lot of the water houses can rule trauma. 12th, 4th, and 8th house can deal with things that have to do with psychological baggage and PTSD and all that stuff. It's not all fun and games with this transit, I'm not gonna lie. So you can find yourself in some serious situations that seem to come out of nowhere. Okay, like things that can really help define your psyche. So, for example, we had Frank Sinatra had this transit sort of going on when he was experiencing some sort of legal troubles. And this happened in 1939, where he was arrested on charges of seduction. So what happened was Frank Sinatra got his then girlfriend Toni pregnant, and she ended up having a miscarriage. And after that, Frank Sinatra got Nancy Barbato pregnant, and he told Toni that he was going to marry Nancy, who he had gotten pregnant, and he ended up sort of like breaking it off and calling it off with Toni. And this led Toni to be like, okay, this guy has seduced me, this guy has just like thrown me away. Like, she felt some type of way about it. And obviously there was this huge conflict and this huge fight on the street, which led to Frank Sinatra being arrested. So she just kind of just said, hey, you know, this guy seduced me and then threw me away. And then he also got, obviously, Nancy Sinatra's mother pregnant, you know, Nancy Barbato pregnant during that time. So you can see how this is like a dramatic sort of situation where you're involving the police, you're involving two girls fighting between two girls, involves in pregnancy. It's like a situation you're like, wow, that's really 8th house, huh? Eventually, Toni also got arrested because I guess she tried to fight Nancy as well. You never really think of these celebrities this way sometimes, where you're just like, this is so messy, okay? Or this is like, I shouldn't say messy, it sounds like a judgment, but it's just such a complicated situation that you can find yourself in like that. So you're dealing with issues of jealousy, you're dealing with the police, you're dealing with the pregnancy, you're dealing with fighting between two people, and your life should take in this turn. Another thing that happened during this time is actually Frank Sinatra started gaining some traction. He became like sort of known, at least among, he was like in a band at the time, and he ended up sort of attracting a lot of jealousy from his bandmates because he was kind of seen as like the ladies' man. So he would actually attract a lot of attention from women in general. And the 8th house rules sex and sexuality. So it's a good time for that, you know, if you have this transit, Libra. So he actually got really popular with the ladies. And because of this, his band members would like beat him up quite often because out of jealousy. So you see those 8th house situations just kind of happening over and over again. He got sick of it. He left the band and he started doing his own thing. So it worked out for him, right? So, but you're encountering people who just have that strong energy where they're literally physically attacking him just for being, I guess, very attractive to ladies. So let's get into Scorpio rising. So Scorpio, this is happening in your 7th house. Okay. Very interesting. So there's a lot of things going on with the 7th house. 7th house has to do with relationships mainly, and it also has to do with like your reputation in the public. Like I said, it's 10th from the 10th, as well as it kind of has to do with traveling a little bit too. It can also have to do with just your career and in general. 7th house really rules quite a few things, okay? Courtrooms and contracts as well, okay? Similar to the 9th house, okay? So what can happen is you can have some sort of radical changes in your relationships, whether that's you getting married, you getting divorced, or you just sort of establishing different rules for the relationships that you want or have in your life. Another thing that happened is I've seen in this transit from like looking at various different charts is actually a lot of people will want to be very independent. So it's not like they don't get into relationships. It's more like they find themselves in relationships where they don't want to really commit too much, or they don't want to fully have themselves invested into a relationship, okay? Because Uranus energy is very, very, very independent. It's like saying, I want to do my own thing. I want to have my own creativity during this time period. For example, you have individuals like Katharine Hepburn. When Uranus transited her 7th house in Taurus, she began dating like an eccentric person, which is very Uranus, Howard Hughes, who was very known for being eccentric. And not only that, but he was, like I said, Uranus sort of kind of works like Rahu energy. And obviously Howard Hughes was filthy rich. And that's very Rahu energy because Rahu is a sort of materialistic point or aspect, whatever you want to call it. So it's like she ended up dating someone very eccentric, very materialistic. He was like this rich pilot, filmmaker, investor. I mean, this guy was so rich that one time he checked into this hotel in Vegas called the Desert Inn. And when they tried kicking him out, he just bought the hotel. Okay, so that's how rich this guy was, right? So you can find yourself dating people who are from different social classes, whether that's you being like the person dating somebody who's super rich, or you dating somebody who is maybe from a poorer background. Whatever it is, it sort of just gives you people who are just extremely different, who have this whole different outlook on life based on their social standing, their race, their culture, their religion. I mean, Katharine Hepburn ended up dating Howard Hughes, who was very Uranus energy. This guy's very eccentric, okay? I know during the relationship, I think he may have tried to propose to her, but she was just she said she didn't want to commit. She didn't want to get married or anything like that, or something like that. She just didn't want to commit to a relationship. She was really focused basically on her career. So she never really fully gave her all energy into relationships at that point. So like I said, Uranus coming through the 7th house can kind of detach you a little bit from your relationships from people, okay? It's just a really great transit for enjoying your freedom, as well as it's good for switching up your own narrative and manner and reputation. So if you have a reputation for being, I don't know, it could be anything. You could have a reputation for being stern, and you're just like, well, I don't want to be stern anymore. I want to be known as being silly. And so it's a good transit for that. And it also can create relationships, like I said, that are interracial, international, long distance, internet relationships, just things that are just not not the normal path that people take and within relationships. But ultimately what this transit does is by the end, you sort of have a strong understanding of what kind of partner you want, because it can bring various different people in and out of your life. So now you're seeing what you value, what you want, and what you can gain and what you need from relationships around you. That's really what this transit is going to do for you guys. So you're going to meet some exciting people during this time period, without a doubt, Scorpio. Sagittarius rising. So Uranus will be actually transiting your 6th house. So you guys, and actually Gemini, have a good amount of work ahead of you. I'm not gonna lie. For example, we had Eleanor Roosevelt had this transit in her 6th house during the Great Depression, and she became like this civil rights advocate, standing up for people, promoting women and leadership, and just overall being a guide and protecting people who are in lower class positions, or people who are just in a societal position that is different from you, that's not ideal situation to be in. So the Sagittarius rising, you can become kind of like those advocates for change during this time period, especially you two Geminis. This also has to do with relationships resolving conflict. This also has to do with you guys dealing with health related matters. So I know Eleanor Roosevelt, she totally redid like the White House kitchen and how they sort of served meals. Actually, she became known, the White House during this time period became known for sort of serving disgusting meals. Very disgusting and nasty, non-tasteful meals. But she did this because she was trying to uplift the morale of the people. She wasn't trying to say, oh, look at what we're eating. We're eating these fancy dinners at the White House while everyone is going through the depression, eating their dandelion salads. She was like, no, we're with you. We're with the American people. We're eating, nasty food too. Okay. We're choosing practical over taste. So I'm not saying you guys have to choose practical over taste, but there may be some changes to your eating habits during this time period, and also some changes through your health. This could actually be a really good transit for your health. It's really just asking you to pay attention to these areas in your life. Whether, like I said, is coming like a voice for, it's really you, it's less becoming a voice for yourself, because 6th house is like the house of servitude. So it's more like you becoming a voice for other people, you trying to help other people, you trying to benefit other people, as well as from a health level. This will be having to do with the consumption of food, okay? Or consumption of just what you put into your body and health, okay? So it doesn't have to just be food, it can be drugs as well. So if you suffer from any sort of like addictions or things that you put into your body, be mindful for that during this time period. This would be a great time to reevaluate those behaviors. I'm not going to go too far into that, but just want to give a heads up for Sagittarius rising. So anything having to do with like quitting, drinking, smoking, etc., like that would be like, this would be a really good time period for that if you were Sagittarius or Gemini rising. There's definitely going to be a lot of research when it comes to your diet, a lot of research when it comes to nutrition, grocery, cooking, because this transit for you Sagittarius, the 6th house transit has to do with your everyday, day-to-day life. So when you have Uranus in your 6th house, and Uranus representing things being shocking, being innovative, representing things being like a little bit out there, or a little bit different and eccentric, it's like your everyday life becomes a little bit outside the norm. Most people are not experiencing the same type of day that you are experiencing. You're gonna be like this outlier when it comes to your day-to-day life. Now, it doesn't have to mean like you're living this crazy, exciting life. You could literally just be somebody who's just really into very, what's the word for it? I'm gonna put eccentric interests. Like, let's say you're somebody who practices magic tricks. Well, if you're Sagittarius rising who practice magic tricks, you may find yourself practicing magic tricks every single day. Okay, so it's just something that's like a little bit outside the norm that you're doing, but you're doing it on a regular basis. It doesn't necessarily mean your whole life has to be dramatic. However, it can do that. It can create a lot of different arguments just out of nowhere, because the sixth house, it is a sixth house transit, and sixth house represents disputes. And like I said, Uranus represents surprises. So there's going to be a lot of surprises, like blow-ups and arguments that can come out of nowhere for you guys. So I just want to say, be prepared to deal with some conflicts at this time. Do not be alarmed that you all of a sudden you're like, why do I keep running into this conflict? Why do I keep facing this? Why do I keep dealing with this? Why do I have to keep running into this problem? Uranus is in your sixth house, bro, sis. You're gonna have to deal with this until 2026, okay? So I just want to throw that out there for you guys. So, and what these conflicts are doing is just advocating for different changes in your day-to-day life regarding social norms. Another thing I forgot to mention is this sixth house rules your job. So you're going to have a lot of different changes in your work environment. Like your job's going to be a lot different the next couple of years, okay? Like from how you start this transit, when in 2018, you're gonna look back and be like, wow, this is not the job I signed up for. If you still have the same job, because it can create a lot of different changes in jobs, but you're gonna be like, this is a totally different environment. Like maybe you used to work as a makeup artist, and then by the end of this transit, all of a sudden you own a dog walker company, and you're like, how did I even get here? Okay, so this transit can just bring like this major upheaval when it comes to your day-to-day environment and also your work. Capricorn rising, this transit is happening in your fifth house. That is the house of relaxation, downtime, romance, creativity. So this can actually be like a really fun transit for you guys, okay? So this transit is really going to bring you know, in a way, it's similar to how Libra's transit is going, where it can bring about a lot of people being sort of attracted to you. Same with Cancer's risings, which I don't think I mentioned that with them, but it can just bring a lot of energy of people sort of like finding you attractive, or maybe just you putting yourself out there in a romantic sense. If you're already in a relationship, then this can just bring a lot of excitement in that area for you, where you're like, okay, well, we're gonna try some new things together as a couple, or throuple, or whatever relationship you're in. But another thing that happens during this transit is, I do want to say for people, it can create sort of unexpected pregnancies or children, or just situations involving children. Like it could just be like, oh, I got in vitro fertilization done, or I've gotten like a surrogate, you know, sort of mother or something like that. But basically, Capricorn risings, the main thing I sort of saw when I was studying charts is that it's like you'll try to push yourself towards work, which, I mean, not surprising, you're a Capricorn rising. Even if you guys are thinking, no, I'm a person who wants breaks, like, you're a Capricorn rising. You'll find yourself working even when you don't want to work, and you're just like, oh, how do I end up here? I've just seen it so many times. But another thing, this trend, like I was trying to say before, what this transit does is it sort of like pushes you guys not to work. Like it will create situations where you are almost like forced to take downtime, where you are kind of forced to step away from a work environment and spend more time with entertainment, doing things you love doing, romance, expressing yourself creatively. You may find like yourself just randomly drawing pictures or painting, or if you're just some sort of craftsman or artist, you may find yourself just randomly writing a song or something like that, or just singing. But whatever it does, the fifth house is going to, the Uranus is going to highlight that area of downtime and relaxation. So it's going to just seem random, like all of a sudden you just have all this free time. Now this can mean that all of a sudden you're out of work, right? So you have all this downtime and free time, so now you find yourself watching a lot of Netflix or something like that, or maybe even just playing sports or whatever it is that you want to do. So like I said, this transit can often just push you towards having a more free time than you normally had before, and it can be on and off during this transit, honestly. This is also can bring about some investment opportunities, where you suddenly find yourself investing in new companies or buying stocks or something like that, or expanding your stock portfolio if you are interested in stocks and investments. Good time to win the lottery, honestly, with Uranus and Taurus, because it can mean like sudden gambling and sudden surprises. Granted, you want to look at your 8th house and see if your 8th house ruler is sort of like in your 5th house, or if it's making some sort of aspect to that in order to win the lottery. You may just have some general good luck with gambling at this time period, but really it depends. This can also sort of mean like changing different majors, having different changes to education. If you're somebody's in college or in school, you just find that your education is is a lot different, which is no surprise given the time period we're in, right? Everyone's experiencing some different changes when it comes to education, as I just mentioned previously in the earlier parts of this video. It's just giving a lot of different, my nose is itching, sorry guys. It's just giving a lot of different opportunities for education. This can also mean is that you find yourself studying different subjects that you weren't interested in before. Maybe you find yourself studying about the Mongolian religions and stuff like that. You just find yourself interested in subjects that just seem outside of your normal interest level, or you just find yourself learning things regarding different occult subjects or different subgenres of subjects. Like maybe you start looking up the history of heavy metal and you're like, wow, I didn't know this about heavy metal. It's just going to be random. 5th house does have to have this connection with history and ancient knowledge as well. So there's going to be like sporadic things that you learn about history that you never knew before, and it's going to help you make connections into just your normal day-to-day life and information gathering. I don't know. 5th house does have to do with ego and self-esteem. So for some reason, this will probably boost your ego and self-esteem and make you feel a little bit more secure in yourself. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's like the more you know, the more confidence you sort of gain, or at least the more secure you will feel, Capricorn, okay? Another thing this can do is you can be dating people from different cultures, different backgrounds, etc. with the, Uranus transit, different classes, different economies. Like, it's just like you'll date people with maybe large age differences between you. Maybe it's more like you'll find yourself dating people who other people may not expect you to be interested in or to be dating. Like, they'll kind of look at you and say, really, that person's dating that person? Like, people will really sort of be taken aback by your dating choices or your dating life. Or it could even be something simple as like people look at you and they may assume that you are in a relationship. They just kind of look at you and say, oh, that person's definitely in a relationship. And when they find out you're single, they're like shocked or something like that. Or they think you're single and then all of a sudden they find out you're secretly married. So it can just kind of flip that reputation when it comes to like your dating life or your sexual life. You can also change your form of how you express yourself creatively. You could go from somebody who works on shoe design to somebody who's all of a sudden interested in playing the guitar or something like that. It can just be like this creative shift going on for you as well. Or you could just be somebody who decides to spend your free time differently. So let's say you spend your free time, I don't know, playing video games. Now all of a sudden you want to spend your free time volunteering at a shelter. It just changes the way you spend your time. Another thing I want to mention with Capricorn is this can be a good transit for like parties. I know it seems super out there or bizarre considering the circumstances and the things that we are going through right now, but even during the Great Depression, you had a lot of socialites partying. I mean, just look at the film The Great Gatsby. It was like the more people sort of the longer the Depression went on, like the crazier some of these socialite parties would get, okay? Like it was like that. I don't know what it is about economic downfalls, but people just feel the need to like go crazy and party during that. So Capricorns, you could find yourself going to some parties, going to some outing after, you know, things sort of settle down. Aquarius rising. So this is happening in your 4th house. I have to let you know, Aquarius, I do not envy you here. This can be very turbulent for you emotionally, similar to a Libra risings who are sort of going through that psychological things happening, going on. you know, even Gemini risings too is going through their 12th house. So they also have those psychological issues coming up. So 4th house has to do with family and your emotional world, your inner peace, as well as your home and home environment. So it has to do with the place you live. It could be like your apartment, could be a shack, could be a box, whatever it is, wherever you live, it represents that. So what you have here when you have Uranus going through your 4th house is you can have yourself changing living situations. Now this is the same for Leos, I believe, where they also had this in their like 10th house, so it was aspecting them. But you have this going through your 4th house, so it's like saying, oh man, I gotta go through a different living situation. Maybe you have to find yourself moving quite a bit. Maybe you find yourself going through different countries. I know when this particular transit sort of like went through my own personal 4th house, what happened basically is like the past several years, it was more like I had a main place to stay, but since I went through college and all of that stuff, I went through different dorms and stuff like that. I also, you know, lived abroad for a brief period in time. So it was just like different places to stay versus, you know, now there's a little bit more stability actually. So it's just like, it's a transit that can just bring in different places. But the main thing it did was bring about renovations to your place of living. So if you get tired of the place that you were staying, you just finally, you're like, let's say you live in an apartment and you're like, gosh, I want a house now. I just want a house. So now you find yourself buying a house and making a lot of renovations to that house, changing the floor, changing the walls, changing the ceilings, whatever it is. It's kind of like bringing renovations to your home and home environment. As well as 4th house can represent vehicles. So you could find yourself with a new car. You could find yourself getting rid of some old cars, just making a lot of transitions in regards to vehicles, homes, etc. But the main thing is it's going to bring about a lot of psychological growth. So all that stuff you think, oh, I'm burying that past, I'm letting it all go. Well, it's coming right up again, and it's going to be in your face. All those feelings, all those thoughts, if you have some dark thoughts and you feel like you can't suppress them or something like that, they're coming right up to the surface during this transit, and you're going to have to deal with them by the end of it, I promise you. So it's going to really, what it really is going to do is going to bring about an emotional roller coaster. I'm not going to lie. You're going to feel like it can be hard sometimes to have some peace of mind, and you're really going to want to separate yourself from your family during this time period, especially like I said, with this Bharani energy and Krittka. It's going to seem like the home environment or your family is just going to be at such an odds at what you believe and what you think. So it can create a lot of disputes between the family and home life, or just a lot of various different perspectives. It doesn't even have to be like you guys are arguing. You just kind of feel like you guys just don't see eye to eye on things. When you have this placement in your chart, it's just going to be very tense, or you're just going to feel like the things that they want for you are the things that you don't want for yourself. And the only reason I say that is because Uranus aspects the 10th house, and the 10th house is goals, okay? So, and how you see your life to be and what you want and what you're trying to achieve. So it may seem like your home life is getting in the way of that, or almost like it's just different from what you perceive, like how your family perceives things to be and how they want things to be versus how you want things to be and what you're aiming towards. But what this transit does is it just brings about a lot of emotional intensity, whether that's good. It's, you know, actually I think it's kind of like good at the end of the day, because it allows you to like reevaluate your world in front of you and your worldview, and it just brings about, oh my gosh, so much significant emotional growth. Another thing is it will do is it will bring about new family members, which is not surprising because it's like a long period of time, but it could be like new nieces, new nephews. And I saw for some charts in general, it was just like people having kids themselves in general during this transit. Really, it's just a period where you want to become more emotionally independent, if that makes sense. Like if you sort of look to someone to bring about your own happiness, you look for someone to sort of like open your world, or make you feel alive, this is going to say you can no longer rely on those people. You need to look within your own inner world to find peace. So that's what it's going to do for you, Aquarius. It doesn't sound like the most exciting transit, but it's going to be one of the more enlightening transits. You're really going to get to know yourself during this transit. Another thing is the 4th house is the darkest point of the chart. So you can go through some pretty dark experiences at this time. Or it's just like saying that you can go and really dive deep into your own inner world. It's probably like a combination of both, actually. But don't think that this is all gloom and doom. I really do think that this is a really amazing transit, and you can come out very like enlightened, and you're going to really learn a lot about yourself as well as the people around you. And you're going to really see who you are on a foundational level, okay? Who you are, what you value, what you need emotionally from other people as well as yourself. And what kind of environment you want to live in as well. So like I said, that's what it has to do with moving and stuff like that. Pisces, last but not least, this is happening in your 3rd house. So this can lead to learning curves, especially when it comes to communication and miscommunication, okay? But it's really great because now you guys are becoming like these super amazing, effective communicators. Or what it does is it brings about a new skill. You know, actually, when Uranus went through my 3rd house personally, that is actually when I learned tarot and astrology. That's when I first started getting into tarot and astrology. It was so long ago. Maybe not that long ago. I'm not that old, but I'm not going to reveal my age, but I'm just going to say it happened a while ago. So you can learn some new skills, whether that has to do with photography, graphic design, drawing, sculpture, film, meditation, hair braiding, learning ruins, learning how to create videos, learning about lighting, learning how to make curtains, whatever it is that you want to learn, or a skill that you feel like you need in your life that's going to be important and prevalent. It's going to happen during this period. And actually, transits, major transits like Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, and stuff that happen in your 3rd house become even more relevant when they cross your 5th house, because the 5th house is the higher version of the 3rd house. So any skill you learned, like let's say Uranus is transiting your 3rd house right now, or Uranus is transiting your 3rd house right now, when it gets to your 5th house, that skill you learned in your 3rd house is going to be super important when it comes to your 5th house, and you're going to be at a point, not a mastery level, but you're going to be at a very good level when it comes to that skill set, okay? Or a higher level than you were before, okay? Another thing what this transit does, it makes people talk to you. Like, you will not be able to escape this transit. If you are walking around out in the street, and I don't care if this person is 20 feet away, you may find people just randomly shouting and talking to you, because Uranus just brings about conversation, especially in your 3rd house, which is associated with Gemini, which is associated with conversation. So you're going to find yourself in the most unusual, bizarre conversations. You're gonna find people saying some things to you that are just seem so out of the box, and you're like, wow, that is different. Then that's not what I was expecting from that person. There are some things said to me during this Uranus transiting my 3rd house that I will never forget, and it has been some of the funniest things I have ever heard. So it's not even really bad. It's just some things that will catch you so off guard. The conversations you will hear, the conversations that you have, the things that you encounter, the people that you talk to. I don't know what it was, but when Uranus went through my 3rd house, do you know how many like homeless people like would talk to me or would like really approach me? It was the funniest, it's not funny, being homeless isn't funny, but it was the most interesting thing I'd ever seen, because I gained so much perspective during that time period, which I never would have gained had that not happened. So like I said, it's going to bring conversations about people who are just in different situations than you are, in different places in life than you. So for me, it brought about a lot of conversations with people who were homeless for some reason, but like it brought that on. So and it wasn't like I was just approaching homeless people and talking to them. It was just like they kind of just came to me and just started talking to me during that transit. So it's just bringing unlikely people, or people you normally wouldn't expect, conversations with you and learning new skills and mastering conversation. And it can just create a lot of confusion when it comes to your speech too, but you'll be aware of it. People will just kind of be, people will not expect you to say the things that you are about to say. Like, you're gonna really catch people off guard during this transit with what you think, believe, and say, okay? The things that coming out of your mouth, okay? Very polarizing, very radical, very interesting too, and very innovative. And a lot of people will see, wow, that person's got something going on. They got something. Okay, I don't know what it is, but it could be good, it could be bad, it could be neutral, whatever it is. It's just people will see that your thoughts are pretty different, okay? Another thing this transit does, it will expand your just general daily radius. So something that can happen is if you're a person who doesn't drive, or a person who doesn't have a license, or you're a person who just generally just walks everywhere, you could find yourself getting a car, learning to drive, taking the bus. Like it says, it just expands your general radius. So if you're somebody who just goes to work and school, well, now you go to work and school, and you also go to your friend's house, and you also go to this bookstore, and then you also go to your astrology club or something like that. It just expands your groups, it expands the people you talk to, expands the amount of distance that you will drive. It will that you will transport yourself to. So you could take like a subway, you could take like a metro, you can take like a bike, whatever it is. It just generally like expands your radius, your general radius, and where you go and who you engage with. You can also find yourself joining multiple different groups, whether that is like if you're college and you're just joining some group on campus, or in general you're just joining a group. Actually, I think a lot of especially, I'll give an example during this time period. Like, I think I found myself, actually I wanted to join a few groups, but I couldn't, just because based on my schedule was super chaotic. But something that I did do, which was, I had a lot of like different internships during this time period. So I guess it is like it's expanding more so your skill level, as well as expanding your resume. So the things that you can write and put on your resume for life, you can sort of do during this transit. Another thing I want to say, be wary about during this transit is like, be careful of like the ideas that are being like introduced to you. So a lot of times when we have Uranus going through our third house, like I said, Uranus can bring about very radical points of view. So sometimes it can bring about some indoctrination, like some people just saying, you have to believe what I say, you have to believe what I say, you have to believe what I say. So I would advise you to sort of do the research yourself. Uranus is a very independent planet, so it's best to act on the nature of Uranus and come up with your own sort of independent thoughts, ideas, and opinions. During this time period. Don't rely on other people as much for your information, including this video. Look up some stuff yourself. Like if you want to see what's happening for Pisces rising transit, come on, look that up yourself. Don't just rely on me. So create some more independent thought as well. Another thing I want to be wary about is accidents. So that can be an issue that happens during this time period, where you find yourself running into a few accidents that you you may or may not have caused. Okay, it's just one of those things when it comes to sort of like transportation, driving and stuff. So be careful of your transportation and things as well. Like, you know how many people like tried to run me off the road with this transit? It's crazy. And I wasn't even doing anything wrong. Like, I think 2 of the times I was like, whoa, this person literally just crossed like 4 or 5 lanes to like just to like going straight at my car. It's crazy during this transit. So be careful of the road, be careful of transportation, be careful of vehicles, be careful of all of that stuff, because this can bring about a lot of accidents when it comes to, you know, that going on as well. The same with walking, because walking is a form of transportation. You might trip a lot. I mean, actually the main scar I have on my leg came to me during Uranus transit, because I actually fell and got like a scar on my leg, and it's there for life. I don't mind it. I actually like it. So I think I have sort of like gone through all of the meetings, all of that information, all of the happenings going on with this Uranus and Taurus energy. I hope that I can bring in more in-depth astrological videos in the future. I am so excited to share for you guys any sort of knowledge that I've gained, do you not know how much I have just looked up? I think that's part of the reason it took me so long. It's because I kept running into this thing and then that thing and then this thing and then that thing, and it's just like, oh my god. So if you have gotten to this point in the video, I just want to give a huge thanks to you guys, astronauts, for supporting me and watching my content and believing in my channel. I know I haven't gone for a minute, so I can understand why you're like, girl, where you been? But like, really, it just means a lot that I can share my thoughts. Hopefully I didn't come off as like this sort of crazy person, but you know what, if you come off that way, you come off that way. So it's just really amazing. I wanted to share all this information that I have, and hopefully this gave you like a clear insight on what's going to be happening when Uranus Taurus transit, not only just on a global level, but on a personal level as well. And that is ultimately what I wanted to say. What I believe is going to happen, or not what I believe is going to happen, what I believe that the universe wants for us. I think the universe wants us to create balance, to create more tolerance and more accepting of other people in the world in order to live harmoniously. So feel free to follow me at Astro_Tarot Research. I hope to get back to the weekly readings, and I think the next video I'm gonna do is gonna be a tarot card reading, because I do want to get back to that. And that is all I have for you guys. I am super hungry. I think I've been talking for hours, and I will see you next time. Au revoir.